The gunshot echoed through Ironwood Ranch at exactly midnight, sending Clara Whitfield diving behind the stable door, her heart hammering against her ribs. 3 hours into her first night of work, and already someone wanted her dead. But as Ethan Calder emerged from the shadows, smoking rifle in hand, his eyes locked onto hers with an intensity that made her forget the danger entirely. "Been waiting for you since spring, Miss Whitfield," he said, lowering his weapon. "Question is, are you staying or running?" Dear friends, settle in as I share this tale of destiny and danger in the American West. And please comment below which town you're watching from. I'd love to know how far this story has traveled tonight. The stagecoach lurched to a final bone-rattling stop outside Redemption Creek's general store, and Clara Whitfield knew there was no turning back. Not with $3.17 to her name. Not with the letter from the bank folded in her pocket informing her that her family's farm in Missouri had been seized for unpaid debts. Not with her father 6 months in the ground and her mother following him just 3 weeks later from a broken heart disguised as consumption. She stepped down from the coach, her worn leather boots hitting the dusty street with a soft thud. The September sun hung low and angry in the sky, painting the frontier town in shades of amber and rust. Men in weathered hats turned to watch her pass. A young woman traveling alone was unusual enough, but one with Clara's striking green eyes and determined set to her jaw drew particular attention. "Ma'am, you need assistance," the stagecoach driver called down, concern etched in his weathered face. He'd been kind during the 3-day journey from Kansas City, sharing his water and warning her about the rougher passengers. "No thank you, Mr. Garrett," Clara replied, adjusting her grip on the carpet bag that contained everything she owned in the world. "I know exactly where I'm going." That was a lie, of course. All she had was a newspaper clipping worn soft from repeated reading. Ironwood Ranch seeks reliable individual for midnight work. Horse experience required. Room and board provided. Inquire at the Broken Spur Saloon, ask for E. Calder. The Broken Spur sat at the end of Main Street like a crooked tooth in an already gap-filled smile. Paint peeled from its facade, and the bat-wing doors hung slightly askew. Clara paused outside, listening to the tinny piano music and rough laughter emanating from within. She'd never set foot in a saloon before. Good women didn't. But then again, good women didn't take midnight jobs at remote ranches either. She pushed through the doors. The music stopped. Every head in the place turned toward her cowboys, gamblers, working girls with painted faces and tired eyes. The air hung thick with tobacco smoke and the sweet, sour smell of whiskey. "Well, well," a voice drawled from the bar. A man with a sheriff's star pinned to his vest approached, his smile showing too many teeth. "Lost your way, miss. The boarding house is 3 streets over." "I'm looking for E. Calder," Clara said, proud when her voice didn't shake. "About the job at Ironwood Ranch." The sheriff's eyebrows shot up. "That job, miss. Do you have any idea what—" "She knows what she's doing, Sheriff Morton." The voice came from the shadows in the corner of the saloon, deep and steady as distant thunder. A man unfolded himself from a table, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a black duster that had seen better days. When he stepped into the lamplight, Clara's breath caught. Ethan Calder couldn't have been more than 30, but his face carried the weight of someone who'd lived longer. Dark hair fell across his forehead and his eyes. God, his eyes were the color of winter sky just before a storm. A thin scar ran from his left eyebrow to his cheekbone, and his hands, she noticed, were scarred from rope work and rough living. "Miss," he waited, those storm-colored eyes never leaving her face. "Whitfield, Clara Whitfield. You answered my advertisement." "I did." He studied her for a long moment, taking in her travel-worn dress, her determined stance, the way she didn't flinch under the scrutiny of every man in the saloon. "The job starts at midnight, ends at dawn. It's watching pregnant mares through their labor, sometimes helping with difficult births. The work is messy, exhausting, and occasionally dangerous." "I've been delivering horses since I was 12, Clara replied. "My father bred Morgans back in Missouri." Missouri. Something flickered in his eyes. Recognition pain. It was gone before she could identify it. "Can you start tonight?" "Tonight?" Clara blinked. She'd expected questions, maybe a test of her knowledge, not immediate employment. I've got a mare due any day, and my last hand quit 3 nights ago. Said the job was cursed. His lips quirked in what might have been amusement. Superstitious fool heard too many ghost stories from the Apache who used to own that land. I don't believe in curses, Mr. Calder. Just Ethan. He pulled a leather pouch from his coat, counting out coins. Here's your first week's wages in advance. You'll need supplies from the general store, work clothes boots that can handle mud and worse. Mrs. Patterson will set you up. Tell her to put it on my account. Clara stared at the money in her palm more than she'd seen in months. You're paying me before I've done any work. Call it faith, Ethan said, but his eyes held something deeper, something she couldn't read. Or call it desperation. Either way, be at the ranch by 11:30. Take the north road out of town, follow it 5 miles until you see the iron gates. Can you ride? Yes. Good. I'll have a horse waiting at Murphy's livery. Tell him I sent you. He turned to leave, then paused. One more thing, Miss Whitfield. The midnight work, it's not just about the horses. Things happen in the dark hours at Ironwood. Things that might test your nerve. If you're the type to run at the first sign of trouble, I'm not. The words came out fiercer than intended, but Clara didn't soften them. I don't run, Mr. Calder. Not anymore. Their eyes met and held for a moment that stretched like taffy in summer heat. Then Ethan nodded once, touched the brim of his hat, and disappeared through the saloon doors into the dying light. Girl, you have no idea what you just signed up for, Sheriff Morton said, shaking his head. That ranch has buried 3 night workers in the past 2 years. Accidents, Clara asked, though her voice remained steady. If you believe that you're either brave or foolish. He signaled the bartender for another whiskey. Maybe both. Clara left the saloon with her head high, ignoring the whispers that followed her. Mrs. Patterson at the general store, a kindly woman with silver hair and knowing eyes, outfitted her with sturdy boots, 2 pairs of men's work pants, several shirts, and a thick coat. Ethan Calder's a good man, she said quietly as she wrapped Clara's purchases. Lost his parents 5 years back when fever took half the county. His brother Jacob helps run the day operations, but Ethan, he changed after the fever. Keeps to himself mostly, especially at night. Some say he's waiting for something, or someone. The sheriff mentioned other workers who died. Mrs. Patterson's face darkened. Tom Bennett fell from the loft, broke his neck. William Hayes got kicked by a stallion, died 3 days later from the head wound. And Samuel King, she lowered her voice. They found him at dawn with his rifle beside him, single shot to the heart. Some say it was suicide. Others say he saw something in those midnight hours that broke his mind. And you... What do you say? The older woman studied Clara carefully. I say Ironwood Ranch has secrets just like every other place touched by sorrow. But I also say Ethan Calder's been advertising for that midnight position for 6 months, turning away dozens of applicants. The fact that he hired you on sight means something. What? That's for you to discover, child. Murphy's livery stood at the edge of town, run by a grizzled Irishman with arms like tree trunks and a voice like grinding millstones. So you're the lass Ethan hired, he said, leading out a bay mare with intelligent eyes. This here's Duchess. She'll get you to Ironwood safe enough long as you treat her right. Clara ran her hand along the mare's neck, feeling the solid warmth of her, the steady breathing. She's beautiful. Aye, that she is. Ethan raised her from a foal. Says a lot that he's letting you ride her. Murphy helped her secure her purchases to the saddle. Word of advice, miss. Whatever you see at that ranch, whatever you hear, keep it to yourself. Ethan Calder's got enough ghosts without adding gossip to his troubles. The ride to Ironwood Ranch took her through landscape that shifted from town to wilderness in the span of heartbeats. The road wound through stands of juniper and pine past red rock formations that looked like ancient gods frozen mid-stride. As the last light faded from the sky, stars emerged in numbers Clara had never seen back in Missouri. Countless diamonds scattered across black velvet. The iron gates of this ranch appeared just as the moon rose, casting everything in silver light. They stood open, flanked by stone pillars carved with horses in flight. Beyond them, Clara could make out buildings, a main house with lit windows, several barns, corrals, and smaller structures she couldn't identify in the darkness. She guided Duchess through the gates and immediately felt it a shift in the air, as if she'd crossed from one world into another. The temperature dropped several degrees, and somewhere in the distance she heard the low nickering of horses. "You're early." Clara's heart nearly stopped. Ethan stood beside the main barn, having appeared as silently as smoke. In the moonlight, he looked almost otherworldly tall and dark, with shadows playing across his face in ways that made him seem older, younger, dangerous, sad, all at once. "I wanted to familiarize myself with the layout before starting work," she said, dismounting with as much grace as her trembling legs allowed. "Smart." He took Duchess's reins, his fingers briefly brushing Clara's. The contact sent an unexpected jolt through her like static electricity, but warmer. "Come, I'll show you the night barn." The night barn sat apart from the others' newer construction, with reinforced walls and modern ventilation. Inside, 6 stalls housed pregnant mares in various stages of their term. The smell of hay and horses wrapped around Clara like a familiar embrace. "This one's Lady Midnight," Ethan said, stopping at the largest stall. A black mare with a white star on her forehead regarded them with calm intelligence. "She's due tonight, I think. Maybe tomorrow. First foal, so she'll need watching." "She's magnificent." Clara reached out slowly, letting the mare sniff her hand before stroking her neck. "Morgan bloodline." Ethan's eyebrows rose slightly. "Quarter Morgan, quarter Arabian, half something wild we never did identify. You know your horses." "My father taught me, before the bank took everything." The words slipped out before she could stop them. "I'm sorry for your loss." His voice held genuine sympathy. "Both of them from the look of it." Clara turned sharply. "How did you—" "Your dress. It's been dyed black recently. I can see the original blue at the seams. Fresh mourning. And you're here alone taking a job most men won't touch. That speaks to desperation born of total loss." "You're observant." "I have to be." He moved to the next stall. "This is Scarlet Dawn, Cherokee Rose, and Silver Dollar. The last stall." He paused, something crossing his face. "That one stays empty." "Why?" "Because I said so." His tone brooked no argument, but then it softened. "Your quarters are in the loft above. There's a bedwash stand, even a small stove for coffee. The main house is off limits, unless invited, but there's a kitchen in the bunkhouse you can use for meals. The other workers keep to themselves mostly. My brother Jacob runs the day crew. Good men, but they're superstitious about this barn. You'll likely be alone most nights." "That doesn't bother me." "No." He turned to face her fully, and in the lantern light she could see the intensity in his eyes. "Being alone in the dark, with only the horses for company, knowing that 3 men have died doing exactly what you're about to do, that doesn't bother you." "Should it?" A smile ghosted across his lips, the first real smile she'd seen from him. "No. But most people would at least pretend concern." "I'm not most people, Mr. Calder." "Ethan," he corrected. "And no, Miss Whitfield, I'm beginning to see that you're not." He showed her the feed routine, the water schedule, where the medical supplies were kept. His hands were gentle with the horses, his voice dropping to a low murmur when he spoke to them. Clara found herself watching him more than she should, the way he moved with economical grace, the way the lamplight caught the planes of his face, the way his presence seemed to fill the space without overwhelming it. "There's one more thing," he said as they finished the tour. From his coat, he pulled out a rifle well-oiled and loaded. "Can you shoot?" "Yes." Her father had insisted on it back when they'd had trouble with cattle thieves. "Good. Keep this with you always. The wolves have been bold this year, and sometimes—" He trailed off, looking toward the empty stall. "Sometimes we get other visitors. Other Indians, mostly. Apache and Navajo passing through. They don't mean harm usually, but it's best to be prepared." He handed her the rifle, and again their fingers touched. This time, the contact lasted a heartbeat longer than necessary. "I'll check on you before dawn." "You don't sleep." "Not much. Not anymore." He started toward the door, then stopped. "Miss Whitfield Clara, that advertisement ran in newspapers across 3 states. I've had dozens of men apply, experienced horsemen with references and reputation. Do you know why I hired you instead?" Clara's mouth went dry. "No. Neither do I." He said it quietly, almost to himself. "But when you walked into that saloon, something settled, like a puzzle piece finally finding its place. I don't believe in fate, but he shook his head. Never mind. Midnight rambling. Welcome to Ironwood Ranch. Then he was gone, leaving Clara alone with the horses and the weight of his words. The first hours passed quietly. Clara familiarized herself with each mare's temperament, checked their water spoke to them in the low, calm voice her father had taught her. Lady Midnight seemed restless, shifting in her stall, occasionally pawing the ground. Around 2 a.m, Clara heard hoofbeats approaching fast. She grabbed the rifle, moving to the barn door. A rider appeared in the moonlight, pushing his horse hard. As he got closer, she recognized the sheriff from town. "Where's Ethan?" he called out, not bothering to dismount properly. "At the house, I assume. What's wrong?" "Rustlers hit the Brennan place. Killed 2 men, took 30 head of cattle. They're headed this way." His eyes fixed on the rifle in her hands. "You know how to use that?" "Yes." "Then keep it ready. Ethan's got enemy's men who'd love to catch him off guard." He wheeled his horse around. "I'll go wake him." Clara watched him gallop toward the main house, unease prickling her spine. Rustlers. On her first night, she checked the rifle's load, then positioned herself where she could see both the barn entrance and the horses. Minutes stretched like hours. Then she heard voices low and urgent coming from behind the barn, not from the direction of the house. Her heart hammered as she moved deeper into the shadows, rifle raised. Said, "The boss keeps gold hidden here. Just need to check the night barn. Kill anyone who sees us." Clara's hand steadied on the rifle. 3 men, maybe 4, planning to rob and murder. She could scream for help, but they'd be on her before anyone could respond. She could hide, but they'd find her eventually. Or she thought of her father teaching her to shoot bottles off fence posts. "Fear makes your hands shake, Clara girl, but courage makes them steady. Choose courage." Clara stepped out of the shadows, rifle aimed at the lead man's chest. "Stop right there." 4 men froze, their faces masks of surprise in the moonlight. They were rough-looking trail dirty, with guns on their hips. "Well, look what we have here," the leader said, recovering first. "Pretty little thing playing with a big gun. Take another step and you'll find out how well I play." Clara said, her voice steady as stone. The man laughed. 4 against 1, sweetheart. You might get one of us, but... The gunshot cracked through the night like breaking bone. The leader's hat flew off his head, a neat hole punched through its crown. But Clara hadn't pulled her trigger. Ethan stood 10 feet away, smoking rifle in hand, looking like death itself in his long black coat. "The lady asked you to stop. I won't ask as nicely." "Called her?" The leader's voice changed, fear creeping in. "We didn't know." "Now you do. Get off my land. If I see any of you near Ironwood again, I won't aim for your hat." The men scattered like spooked rabbits, mounting their horses and riding hard into the night. Ethan watched them go, then turned to Clara. "You all right?" "Yes." Her hands were shaking now, adrenaline finally catching up. "How did you know?" "Sheriff Morton came to the house. When I heard voices back here, I figured they'd sent scouts while he was distraction." His eyes moved over her, checking for injury. "You would have shot him." It wasn't a question, but Clara answered anyway. "Yes. Most people freeze their first time facing down armed men. I told you, I'm not most people." That ghost smile returned. "No, you're not." He looked at the rifle in her hands. "You held it steady, aimed true. Your father taught you well. He was a good man, just not good with money. The best men rarely are." Ethan moved closer, close enough that she could smell leather and gunpowder and something uniquely him. "Clara, those men, they'll be back. Maybe not tomorrow, maybe not next week, but they'll be back. This ranch, this job, it's not safe." "You're trying to scare me off." "I'm trying to be honest. You deserve that much." Clara met his eyes, saw the concern there, the weight of responsibility he carried. "I've got nowhere else to go, Ethan. No family, no home. Nothing but $3.17 that I don't need anymore because you already paid me. So unless you're firing me, I'm not. Then I'm staying." They stood there in the moonlight, the space between them charged with something Clara couldn't name. Finally, Ethan stepped back. "Lady Midnight's getting close. See how she's waxing her tail." Clara turned to look grateful for the shift to familiar ground. The mare was indeed showing signs, milk beating at her teats muscles, rippling along her sides. Tonight for sure. I'll stay. You don't have to. I want to see if you're as good as you claim. But his tone was teasing, now lighter. Besides, after that excitement, I won't sleep anyway. They worked together through the remaining hours of darkness, preparing the foaling stall, laying out clean straw, warming water. Their movements fell into easy rhythm, as if they'd done this together countless times before. When Lady Midnight's labor began in earnest, just as the eastern sky began to lighten, they were ready. "Front hooves first," Clara murmured, kneeling in the straw as the mare strained. "They're positioned right. You've got good eyes. Most people can't tell in the low light. My mother used to say I had cat eyes, could see in the dark better than most." Claire kept her voice low, soothing, as much for the mare as for herself. This was the part that mattered, reading the signs, knowing when to help and when to let nature take its course. The foal's nose appeared then, the head. Lady Midnight gave a great push and the shoulders emerged. Claire moved then, grasping the foal's front legs, adding her strength to the mare's next contraction. "Easy, easy," Ethan murmured, and Clara wasn't sure if he was talking to her, the mare, or the foal. With a final effort, the foal slipped free into Clara's waiting hands, a colt black as his mother, with the same white star on his forehead. Clara cleared his nostrils, rubbed his sides with straw to stimulate breathing. The colt gasped, shook his head, and opened eyes that seemed to hold all the wisdom of ancient things. "Perfect," Ethan breathed, and when Clara looked up, he was watching her with an expression she couldn't read. "Absolutely perfect." "He's a beauty," Clara agreed, helping the colt as he struggled to find his legs. "What will you name him?" "Midnight Star, I think, for his mother and his mark." Ethan moved closer, kneeling beside her in the straw. "Clara, I haven't seen anyone handle a birth that smoothly since," he stopped, jaw tightening, since my mother. She had the same gift with horses, the same steady hands, the same instinct." He was quiet for a moment, watching the colt take his first wobbling steps. "She died 5 years ago. Fever took her and my father within days of each other." "I'm sorry." "She left me a letter," Ethan said suddenly, as if the words had been pressing against his teeth, demanding release. "Said I'd know when the right person came along to help with the ranch. Said I'd feel it like recognition, even if I'd never met them before." He turned to look at Clara, and his eyes held something vulnerable, something that made her heart race. "I've been placing that advertisement since spring, turning everyone away because none of them felt right. And I do. From the moment you walked into that saloon," he reached out, brushing a strand of hay from her hair. His fingers lingered against her cheek for just a moment. "I don't believe in fate, Clara. But I don't know what else to call this." The barn door creaked open, breaking the moment. A younger version of Ethan stood silhouetted against the dawn light. Same dark hair, same strong build, but with an easier smile and eyes that hadn't seen as much darkness. "Well, well," Jacob Calder said, grinning. "The mysterious midnight worker who has the whole town talking, and you've already got Ethan delivering foals with you." "That's a first." "Jacob," Ethan warned, but there was affection in his tone. "I'm Jacob," the younger man said, ignoring his brother and extending his hand to Clara. "The better-looking Calder brother." "Clara Whitfield." She shook his hand, noting the calluses that spoke of hard work. "And I'd have to disagree with your assessment." Jacob laughed, delighted. "Oh, I like her already. She's got spine." He peered into the stall. "Beautiful colt. Midnight Star." "How did you know?" Clara asked. "Ethan's been saving that name for 5 years, waiting for the right horse." Jacob's eyes danced with mischief. Or maybe he was waiting for the right person to share the naming with. "Don't you have work to do?" Ethan growled, but his ears had gone slightly red. "Always. But I wanted to meet the woman who got you to come back to the night barn. You haven't set foot in here after dark since—" Jacob stopped, his smile fading. "Well, for a long time." Clara looked between the brothers, sensing undercurrents she didn't understand. "I should clean up. The other mares need checking." "Of course." Ethan stood, offering her his hand. She took it, letting him pull her to her feet. Again that electric sensation where their skin touched. "You did well tonight, Clara. Very well." Does that mean I keep the job? It means, Ethan said softly, that I can't imagine anyone else doing it. As Clara climbed the ladder to her loft quarters, she heard Jacob's voice drift up. You know what Mother would say seeing you like this. Don't, Jacob. She'd say it's about damn time. Clara washed her face and hands in the basin, changed into clean clothes, and tried to make sense of the past few hours. She'd come here desperate, running from loss and poverty. But something else was happening at Ironwood Ranch. Something that felt bigger than a job, bigger than survival. When she descended back to the barn, both brothers were gone, but they'd left fresh coffee and warm biscuits wrapped in a cloth. A note in Ethan's precise handwriting read, Rest today. Tonight we start your real education. E. Clara smiled, tucking the note into her pocket. Outside, the sun painted the ranch in gold and amber, revealing its true scope, vast pastures stretching to distant mountains, hundreds of horses grazing peacefully, the main house standing proud against the sky. It was beautiful and lonely all at once, like its owner. That afternoon, she dozed fitfully in her loft dreams, mixing with memory. She saw her parents' farm being sold at auction, her mother's treasured piano going for a fraction of its worth. She saw herself standing at two graves, wondering how she'd survive. Then the dreams shifted Ethan's storm-colored eyes, his rare smile, the way he'd said perfect, while watching her with the foal. She woke to a knock on the barn door. Mrs. Patterson from the general store stood outside with a basket. Thought you might need a proper meal, the older woman said, producing fried chicken cornbread and apple pie. And maybe some company. They sat on hay bales eating and talking as the sun began its descent. Mrs. Patterson shared stories of the town, the ranch, the Calder brothers. Their mother, Sarah, was a remarkable woman. Could gentle the wildest horse heal the sick with herbs and patience. She loved both her boys, but Ethan was special to her. They shared something, a connection to the land, to the animals, to things the rest of us couldn't quite see. What kind of things? Mrs. Patterson hesitated. Old things. The Apache who lived here before they said this land was sacred. A place where the veil between worlds was thin. Sarah believed it. Said she could feel the spirits of all the horses that had ever run free here. She smiled sadly. When the fever took her, Ethan was with her. She told him to wait, that someone would come who'd understand the ranch the way she did, the way he did. You think I'm that someone? Child, I saw Ethan's face when he left the store after sending you here. He looked like a man who'd been holding his breath for 5 years and could finally breathe again. As darkness fell, Mrs. Patterson took her leave and Clara prepared for her second night of work. She checked each mare refreshed water, measured out feed. The routine was already becoming familiar, comforting even. Ethan appeared at exactly midnight, as if summoned by the clock tower in town whose chimes carried faintly on the wind. Ready for your real education. I thought I already knew about horses. Horses, yes, but Ironwood is more than horses. He led her outside where the full moon turned the landscape into a silver sea. This land has been in my family for 3 generations. My grandfather won it in a poker game from a man who'd stolen it from the Apache. He tried to make amends, learned their ways, their stories. Some of those stories, they're important. They walked among the corrals past horses that nickered softly at Ethan's approach. He showed her which horses were descended from wild Mustang stock, which carried the bloodlines of Spanish conquistadors' mounts, which had been gifts from tribal chiefs who'd become friends with his grandfather. Each horse here has a story, he said, stopping at a corral where a magnificent stallion paced. This is Stormbringer. The Apache said his bloodline carries thunder in their hooves. On certain nights you can hear it like distant drums. You believe that? I believe there's more to this world than what we can see and measure. Don't you? Clara thought of the empty stall in the barn, the one Ethan wouldn't discuss. Yes. They continued their tour. Ethan pointing out landmarks, the rock formation that looked like a sleeping giant, the stream that never ran dry, even in drought years, the grove of ancient oaks where his parents were buried. Why midnight work? Clara asked as they circled back toward the barn. You could hire someone to watch the mares during normal hours. Ethan was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. My mother always said babies, horse, or human prefer to come into the world in the quiet hours when the veil is thin. But also, he stopped walking, turned to face her. I needed someone who wasn't afraid of the dark. Someone who could handle being alone with their thoughts, with the weight of silence. Why? Because those are the hours when this ranch shows its true face. When you can hear the stories in the wind, feel the presence of all who came before. His eyes searched hers. You felt it, didn't you? When you rode through the gates? Clara nodded, remembering that shift in the air, that sense of crossing a threshold. Like entering another world. Yes. The word came out soft, wondering. Exactly like that. A coyote howled in the distance, answered by another, then another, until the night filled with their wild song. Clara shivered, and without thinking, Ethan stepped closer, his warmth a barrier against the cool night air. Are you frightened? No. And she wasn't. Standing there with him, surrounded by the ancient song of predators, she felt more alive than she had in months. Should I be? Never. Not here. Not with me. The promise in his voice sent warmth spreading through her chest. They stood there close enough that she could see the pulse beating in his throat, feel the controlled tension in his body. The moment stretched taut as a bowstring until a mare's whinny from the barn broke the spell. Cherokee Rose, Clara said, recognizing the sound. She's restless tonight. Then we'd better check on her. They found the mare pawing her stall, showing early signs of labor. Working together, they prepared for another birth falling into the rhythm they'd established that morning. But this time things went wrong. The foal's turned, Clara said, her experienced hands reading the signs. Breech presentation. Can you fix it? Maybe. She shed her jacket, rolling up her sleeves. I'll need you to hold her steady. What followed was an hour of struggle, Clara working with patient determination to turn the foal, while Ethan kept the mare calm with voice and touch. Sweat beaded on Clara's forehead, her arms aching from the effort, but she didn't stop. Almost, she breathed. Just a little more there. The foal shifted into position, and with the next contraction began to emerge properly. Within minutes, a beautiful filly lay in the straw, Cherokee Rose nuzzling her with exhausted affection. You saved them both, Ethan said, and when Clara looked up, there was something raw in his expression. I've seen experienced horsemen lose both mare and foal in that situation. My father always said I had the touch. She flexed her sore fingers. That horses trusted me even when they shouldn't. It's more than that. Ethan knelt beside her, taking her hands in his, examining the scratches from the difficult delivery. It's like you speak their language, like you understand them in a way that goes deeper than training. His thumbs traced over her palms, gentle on the scraped skin, and Clara forgot how to breathe. This close, she could see flecks of silver in his storm-colored eyes, could smell the leather and sage scent of him. Ethan, she whispered, not sure what she was asking. I know, he said, and she believed he did, that he felt this same pull, this recognition that went beyond reason. It's too soon, too fast, but Clara, Another gunshot split the night, but this one was different. Closer. From inside the barn. They were on their feet instantly, Ethan pushing Clara behind him as he drew the pistol from his hip. Stay here. Like hell. Clara grabbed her rifle, following him toward the sound. They found the source in the empty stall, the one Ethan had said must stay empty. The door stood open, and inside a man lay on the straw, blood spreading from a wound in his chest. But that wasn't the strangest part. The man was translucent, like morning mist, and even as they watched, he was fading. Samuel, Ethan said quietly. Not again. The ghostly figure turned toward them, mouth moving as if trying to speak, then dissolved entirely. The blood vanished with him, leaving only clean straw and the lingering smell of gunpowder. Clara's knees felt weak, but she kept her voice steady. That was Samuel King, the worker who died. Yes, he appears sometimes replaying his last moments. Ethan's face was stone, but pain flickered in his eyes. He was in love with a married woman in town. When she chose to stay with her husband, Samuel couldn't bear it. He came here to this stall where he'd spent so many nights, and he gestured at the now empty space. That's why you keep it empty. He deserves that much, a place to rest even if he can't find peace. Ethan closed the stall door carefully. This is what I meant about Ironwood showing its true face in the dark hours. Can you handle this, Clara? The ghost, the echoes of pain that won't fade. Clara thought of her own ghosts, her parents, her lost home, all the things that haunted her waking and sleeping. We all have ghosts, Ethan. At least yours show themselves honestly. He studied her for a long moment, then something in his shoulders relaxed. You really aren't afraid, are you? I'm afraid of plenty. Poverty, being alone, never finding a place where I belong. She met his eyes. But not of this, not of Ironwood, and not of you. You should be afraid of me, he said, his voice dropping low. I'm not an easy man, Clara. I have shadows in me, dark moods that last for days. I see things others don't believe, things others mock. And lately, since you arrived, He stopped, jaw clenching. What? I want things I have no right to want. Not yet. Not when you've only been here 2 days. He turned away. You should go back to the loft. Get some sleep. But Clara had spent too much of her life letting others decide what she should do. She stepped forward, placing her hand on his arm, feeling the tension coiled there like a spring. What if I want those same things? He turned slowly, disbelief and hope warring in his expression. You don't know what you're saying. I know that when you touch my hand, it feels like coming home. I know that when you look at me, I feel seen in a way I never have before. I know that 2 days or 2 years won't change what I felt the moment I saw you in that saloon. She took a breath steady as she could make it. I know I was meant to be here, with you. Ethan's control finally snapped. He pulled her against him, one hand tangling in her hair, the other spanning her waist. Clara. He breathed against her lips, a question and a prayer. Yes, she answered, and then his mouth was on hers and the world exploded into sensation. The kiss was desperate and tender at once, 5 years of loneliness, meeting months of grief and transforming into something entirely new. Clara had been kissed before chase pecks from boys back in Missouri. But this was different. This was recognition coming home, finding the missing piece of herself she hadn't known was lost. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Ethan rested his forehead against hers. I've been waiting for you, he whispered. Since spring, since the fever, since forever. I didn't know your face or your name, but I knew you were coming. How say? The same way I know the weather's changing before the clouds appear. The same way the horses know to come home before a storm. His hands framed her face, thumbs tracing her cheekbones. My mother told me to wait, that love would come when I least expected it, when I most needed it. I thought she was delirious from the fever, but she knew, Clara finished. Mothers always know. Dawn was breaking, painting the barn in shades of gold and rose. The night's work was done, but neither of them moved to separate. Stay, Ethan said suddenly. Not just for the job. Stay for breakfast, for dinner, for everything. The main house has dozens of empty rooms. You shouldn't be alone in the loft. People will talk. Let them. His smile was fierce. I've waited 5 years, Clara. I won't waste time on propriety now. And so Clara found herself at the Calder breakfast table as the sun climbed higher, Jacob grinning at her over his coffee while Ethan cooked eggs with surprising skill. The house was beautiful in daylight, solid wood furniture, Apache blankets on the walls, Sarah Calder's piano in the parlor. Do you play? Clara asked, trailing her fingers over the keys. Mother did, Ethan said. Haven't heard music in this house since she died. Clara sat on the bench, positioning her fingers on the keys. She hadn't played since before her parents died, but muscle memory took over. The melody that emerged was bittersweet, a song her mother had loved about home and belonging and love that transcended death. When she finished, she found both brothers watching her with stunned expressions. It's like she's here, Jacob whispered, like Mother's here again. Ethan crossed to her, pulled her to her feet and into his arms. You're a miracle, he said against her hair, an absolute miracle. And standing there in the morning light, surrounded by ghosts and hope, and the promise of something extraordinary, Clara believed him. She had come to Ironwood Ranch with $3.17 running from loss and despair. But she'd found something worth more than gold, a love that had been waiting for her since spring, a home that welcomed her shadows along with her light, and a man who saw her truly and completely and wanted her anyway. The midnight job she'd thought was her last chance had become her first step toward a life she'd never dared to imagine. And this was only the beginning. The days that followed blurred together like watercolors in rain, each one deepening the connection between Clara and Ethan until she couldn't imagine a time when he hadn't been part of her world. She kept her official quarters in the barn loft propriety, demanded that much, but her mornings began at the main house's kitchen table, and her evenings often stretched long past midnight as she and Ethan talked in the parlor while Jacob dozed in his chair. It was during one of those evening conversations 2 weeks after her arrival that Ethan finally told her about the Rustlers. "They're not random thieves," he said, staring into the fireplace where autumn logs crackled. "They're working for Marcus Thornton." Clara had heard the name whispered in town, a wealthy rancher from the neighboring county who'd been buying up land from desperate families building what some called an empire. "What does he want with Ironwood?" "Water rights." Ethan's jaw tightened. "We control access to Crystal Creek, the only water source that doesn't dry up in drought years. Thornton's offered to buy me out 3 times. Each time I refuse, things get worse. Dead cattle, burned fences, and now he's getting desperate. The drought last summer killed half his herd. He needs our water to survive another dry year." Ethan turned to her, and in the firelight his eyes looked almost amber. "Clara, he won't stop at rustling. Men like Thornton when they want something badly enough." A crash from outside cut him off. Ethan was on his feet, instantly grabbing his rifle from above the mantel. Clara followed, her own weapon in hand she'd taken to keeping it close since the first night's encounter. They found chaos in the main corral. Someone had opened the gates, and horses were scattering into the darkness, including Stormbringer, the valuable stallion with the Apache bloodline. But worse was what they'd left behind: Tom Bennett's body propped against the fence post. "That's impossible," Clara breathed. "He's been dead for 2 years." But as they approached, the body revealed itself as a grotesque scarecrow dressed in Bennett's clothes that should have been buried with him. A note was pinned to its chest. "Some ghosts should stay buried. Leave Ironwood or join them. Thornton's trying to use the ranch's reputation against us." Ethan said, his voice deadly quiet. "He knows about the stories, the deaths. He's trying to scare you off." "Then he doesn't know me very well." Ethan pulled her close, fierce pride in his eyes. "No, he doesn't. But Clara, this is escalating. I need to end this before—" "We need to end this," she corrected. "I'm part of Ironwood now, Ethan. Your fights are mine." Before he could respond, Jacob came running from the direction of the night barn. "The mayor's someone's been in there. They're terrified, and Lady Midnight—" His face was pale in the moonlight. "She's in labor, but something's wrong." They raced to the barn, finding the mares indeed panicked, wheeling in their stalls with whites of their eyes showing. Lady Midnight lay on her side, straining, but the foal wasn't presenting properly. "This is different from last time," Clara said, examining the mare. "The foal's stuck, truly stuck. If we don't—" She looked up at Ethan. "I need help, real help. This is beyond what I can do alone. Doc Harrison's in town, but that's 20 minutes hard riding." "I'll go." Jacob volunteered, already moving toward the door. "No." A new voice spoke from the barn entrance, low-accented, familiar, yet strange. An elderly Apache man stood there, dressed in traditional clothing mixed with ranch wear. "I will help." Ethan tensed. "Joseph Two Eagles. What are you doing here?" "The horses called," the old man said simply. Their fear carried on the wind. "This one," he gestured to Clara. "She has the gift, but she needs the old knowledge tonight." "Can you help?" Clara asked, cutting through whatever history existed between the men. Joseph studied her for a long moment, then smiled. "You are the one Sarah Calder spoke of in her dreams." "Yes, child, I will help." What followed was unlike anything Clara had experienced. Joseph produced herbs from his pouch, burning some to calm the mares while creating a paste from others that he applied to Lady Midnight's straining sides. He sang in his native tongue a low rhythmic chant that seemed to ease the mare's panic. "Now," he said to Clara, "reach in again. Feel for the foal's spirit, not just its body." Clara wanted to question what that meant, but something in the old man's eyes made her simply obey. She closed her eyes, let her hands guide themselves, and suddenly she understood. She could feel the foal's distress, its confusion, the way its life force flickered like a candle in wind. "Turn left," Joseph instructed. "Gentle. Follow the spirit's path." Clara did, and miraculously the foal shifted. Not easily, not without struggle, but it moved. 20 minutes later, Midnight Star's sister entered the world, a tiny filly, weak but breathing. "She will live," Joseph announced after examining the foal, "but she carries the mark of a hard birth. She will be special, this one. Different." "Like how?" Ethan asked, but the old man was already moving toward the door. "Some answers come with time," Ethan called her. "Your mother knew this." He paused, looking back at Clara. "You did well, child. Sarah would be proud." Then he vanished into the night as suddenly as he'd appeared. "Who was that?" Clara asked, exhausted and exhilarated in equal measure. "A friend of my grandfather's. He lives on the reservation now, but he used to work here when I was young. He taught my mother about herbs, about the old ways of healing." Ethan ran his hand through his hair. "I haven't seen him since her funeral." "He came for the horses." "He came for you," Jacob said quietly. Both Clara and Ethan turned to him in surprise. "What?" "It's obvious. Joseph Two Eagles doesn't leave the reservation for anything anymore. But somehow he knew you needed him." The filly struggled to her feet, wobblier than her brother had been, but determined. When she finally stood, they saw what Joseph had meant by the mark. Her coat was black like her mother's, but with a perfect white lightning bolt running from her forehead down to her chest. "Storm's daughter," Clara murmured, and both brothers nodded. It was the only possible name. As dawn broke, they were still in the barn, watching over mare and foal. The other horses had calmed the night's terrors, fading with the darkness. But Clara couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted, that Thornton's threat was more serious than they'd realized. Her instincts proved right 3 days later. Clara was alone in the night barn, all the Calders having ridden to a neighboring ranch to help with a fire, or so they'd been told. She realized too late it was a trap when she heard multiple horses approaching far too early for the brothers' return. 6 men entered the barn, led by a man who could only be Marcus Thornton himself. He was older than she'd expected, perhaps 50, with silver hair and cold gray eyes that reminded her of winter ice. Expensive clothes couldn't hide the cruel set of his mouth, or the way his hand rested too casually on his gun. "Miss Whitfield," he said, tipping his hat with mock courtesy. "We haven't been properly introduced. Marcus Thornton." Clara kept her rifle visible, but not directly aimed. "Mr. Thornton, you're trespassing." Some might say I'm making a business call. You see, I've been trying to buy this ranch from the Calders for years. They're stubborn men, unreasonable. But you're new here. You might see the sense in my offer." "I'm just hired help, Mr. Thornton. I don't make decisions about selling." "Don't you?" His smile was sharp as broken glass. "A pretty young woman alone with 2 bachelors working midnight hours, I think you have more influence than you pretend." The insult was clear, and Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks. "Say what you came to say and leave." $50,000, Thornton said. "That's my offer for Ironwood. The Calders can take it and start fresh somewhere else. You could go with them, or better yet, come work for me. I could use someone with your skills. The ranch isn't for sale." "Everything's for sale, Miss Whitfield. It's just a matter of price." He stepped closer, and his men spread out subtly, threatening. "Or pressure." "Get out!" Clara raised the rifle, now aimed at Thornton's chest. "You won't shoot me. Not in cold blood. You're not the type." "You're right," Clara said, "but I'll shoot your horse. And then his." She swung the rifle toward the nearest mount. "How far do you think you'll get on foot with angry ranchers on your trail?" Thornton's face darkened. "You have no idea who you're dealing with, girl." "Neither do you." The sound of approaching hoofbeats, many of them made Thornton's men shift nervously. But instead of the Calders, a group of Apache riders appeared in the doorway, Joseph Two Eagles at their head. "The young woman asked you to leave," Joseph said calmly. "It would be wise to listen." Thornton looked between Clara and the Apache warriors, calculation in his eyes. "This isn't over," he said finally. Tell Calder that. Tell him I always get what I want." After they left, Joseph dismounted, approaching Clara with approval in his weathered face. "You stood strong. Sarah Calder chose well." "I don't understand. How did you know to come—" "The land speaks to those who listen, and you, child, you're learning to hear it." He touched the medicine bag at his neck. "There will be more trouble. Thornton has darkness in him, the kind that poisons everything it touches. But you have something stronger." "What?" "Love. For the land, for the horses, for the men who hold your heart." He smiled at her startled look. "Did you think we couldn't see it, the way you and Ethan Calder circle each other like eagles in a mating dance? The whole territory knows." When the Calders returned an hour later, having discovered the fire was a false alarm, they found Clara surrounded by Apache warriors sharing coffee and listening to Joseph's stories about the ranch's early days. Ethan's face went through several expressions: alarm, confusion, and finally something that looked like awe. "They protected me," Clara explained after the Apache had left. "Thornton came with 6 men. Joseph arrived just in time." Ethan pulled her into his arms, not caring that Jacob and several ranch hands were watching. "I should have been here. I should have known it was a trap." "You couldn't have known, and I handled it." "You did more than that," Jacob said, grinning despite the seriousness of the situation. "You've got the Apache riding to your defense now, Clara. You're becoming a legend." But Ethan's face remained troubled. That night, as Clara worked with the horses, he shadowed her every move. Finally, she confronted him. "I'm not made of glass, Ethan. I know that. God, I know that. You're the strongest woman I've ever met. But Thornton, he doesn't make idle threats. And if something happened to you because of my fight—" "Our fight," Clara corrected again. "Ethan, I need you to understand something. I didn't come to Ironwood just for a job. I came because I had nowhere else to go, yes. But also because something called me here. I felt it the moment I saw that advertisement like a pull in my chest. And when I met you, you felt it too." His hands framed her face. "The recognition. Like I'd been looking for you my whole life without knowing it." He kissed her then, deep and desperate, like he was trying to merge their souls through touch alone. When they broke apart, his eyes held a determination that made her shiver. "Marry me." Clara's heart stopped. "What?" "Marry me, Clara. Not someday. Not after we've courted properly. Now, tomorrow. Before Thornton makes his next move. Ethan, we've known each other less than a month. And yet you know me better than anyone except my mother ever has. You see the ghosts literal and figurative. You understand the land, the horses, the weight of this place. And I love you with a certainty that should frighten me, but doesn't." He dropped to one knee, right there in the barn, pulling out a ring she recognized his mother's, a simple silver band with a small sapphire that caught the lamplight like captured sky. "Clara Whitfield, will you marry me?" Clara thought of all the sensible reasons to say no. The short acquaintance, the danger surrounding them, the impropriety of it all. Then she thought of how it felt to wake up knowing she'd see him, how natural it was to work beside him, how her heart had recognized him before her mind caught up. "Yes, shh," she said, dropping to her knees beside him. "Yes, Ethan Calder, I'll marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting for her. They kissed again, softer this time, sealing a promise that felt older than both of them. "We'll have to tell Jacob," Clara said when they finally stood. "He already knows," Ethan admitted with a slight smile. "He's known since that first morning when you played Mother's piano. He said I looked at you the way our father looked at our mother, like you were the answer to every question I'd ever asked." The go bus sits. They were married 3 days later in the grove, where Ethan's parents were buried. It was a small ceremony, just Jacob, Mrs. Patterson, Doc Harrison, and his wife. And surprisingly, Joseph Two Eagles and several Apache witnesses. Clara wore Sarah Calder's wedding dress, altered by Mrs. Patterson's skilled hands, and Ethan looked magnificent in his father's suit. The ceremony was simple, but when Ethan promised to love, honor, and cherish her, his voice carried the weight of absolute truth. And when Clara made the same vow, she felt something shift in the very air around them, as if the land itself was bearing witness. "You may kiss your bride," the minister said, and Ethan did thoroughly and without any care for propriety, earning whoops from Jacob and gentle laughter from the Apache contingent. The small reception was held at the ranch house with food prepared by Mrs. Patterson and several women from town who'd taken a liking to Clara. As the sun set, Joseph Two Eagles approached the newlyweds with a gift, a blanket woven in traditional Apache style, but featuring horses that looked remarkably like Ironwood's herd. "For your first child," he said, then added with a twinkle in his eye, "who will arrive before next summer ends." Clara blushed furiously while Ethan grinned. "That's quite a prediction, Joseph." "Not a prediction, a knowing." The old man clasped both their hands. "The land has accepted you both. It will protect you, but you must protect it in return. The fight with Thornton is not over, but you will not face it alone." As if to punctuate his words, a rider appeared on the horizon, spurring his horse hard toward the ranch. It was Sheriff Morton, and his face was grim. "Congratulations on the wedding," he said quickly, "but I've got bad news. Thornton's hired guns professionals from Texas. They'll be here within the week. He's done playing games." The wedding celebration took on a different tone after that, becoming a war council. Plans were made, allies counted, strategies discussed. But that night, when everyone had gone and Clara and Ethan were finally alone in what was now their bedroom, the outside world temporarily ceased to exist. "Are you afraid?" Ethan asked, holding her close in the darkness. "Of Thornton number, of losing this what we have terrified." "We won't lose it," he promised. "I've waited too long, searched too hard. You're stuck with me now, Mrs. Calder." Clara smiled against his chest. "Good, because I have no intention of going anywhere." They made love for the first time as thunder rolled across the valley, rain finally breaking the autumn dry spell. It was tender and passionate by turns, a claiming and a surrender, a promise made in flesh and breath and racing hearts. Afterward, as they lay entwined, Clara understood what Joseph meant about the land accepting them. She felt rooted now, connected not just to Ethan, but to Ironwood itself, to every horse, in every pasture, to the very soil beneath the house. The next few days were a strange mix of honeymoon bliss and preparation for war. During the days, Ethan and Jacob reinforced defenses, hired additional hands, and coordinated with neighboring ranches who'd also suffered from Thornton's aggression. During the nights, Clara maintained her vigil with the pregnant mares, though now Ethan often joined her, turning work into something sweeter. It was during one such night, exactly a week after the wedding, that everything came to a head. Clara was checking on Storm's daughter, who'd grown remarkably in her short life, when she heard it not horses this time, but the absence of sound. The night had gone completely unnaturally quiet. No insects, no coyotes. Even the horses had stopped their usual nighttime sounds. "Ethan," she called softly, and he was beside her instantly, having learned to read her tones. "I hear it too," he said. "Or don't hear it." Then came the smell of smoke. The hay barn. Clara gasped, and they ran toward the structure that held their winter feed supply. It was fully ablaze, flames reaching toward the star-filled sky like desperate hands. But worse, she could hear horses screaming. Someone had moved several of the pregnant mares into that barn. Without thinking, Clara ran toward the fire. She heard Ethan shout behind her, but the horse's terror overrode everything else. She burst through the smoke, finding 3 mares trapped in stalls at the far end. The fire hadn't reached them yet, but the smoke was thick, disorienting. Working purely on instinct and adrenaline, Clara freed the first mare, slapping her hard on the rump to send her running toward safety. The second mare was panicking, rearing in her stall, but Clara managed to get close enough to release the latch. The third mare gawed. It was Cherokee Rose, heavy with her second foal, was down, overcome by smoke. Clara grabbed the mare's halter, pulling with all her strength. "Come on, girl. Get up. Your baby needs you to get up." Through the smoke, she saw Ethan appear like an avenging angel, his face fierce with determination. Together, they hauled Cherokee Rose to her feet, guiding her stumbling steps toward the door. They burst out just as part of the roof collapsed behind them, showering sparks into the night. "Are you insane?" Ethan grabbed her, checking for injuries. "You could have been killed." "So could they." Clara was coughing, eyes streaming but triumphant. All 3 mares were alive, though Cherokee Rose would need attention. "The house." Jacob's voice cut through the night. They turned to see flames licking at the main ranch house's walls. This was coordinated, deliberate. They split up Ethan and several hands fighting the house fire, while Clara and Jacob worked to move horses away from danger. It was chaos, precisely what Thornton had planned. In that chaos, no one noticed the riders until they were already in the yard. Thornton sat his horse like a general surveying a battlefield, his hired guns arranged behind him. "Seems you have a problem, Calder," he called out. "Funny how fire spreads on a dry night." Ethan stepped forward, and even covered in soot and ash, he looked dangerous. "You did this." "Prove it." Thornton's smile was visible even in the firelight. "I'm just a concerned neighbor come to offer assistance. Of course, if you were willing to sell, I could have my men help put out these fires right now." "Go to hell." "Eventually, but you'll get there first if you keep refusing me." Thornton's eyes found Clara. "Shame to see such a pretty widow, because that's what you'll be, Mrs. Calder, if your husband keeps being stubborn." The threat was too much. Ethan went for his gun, but Thornton's men were ready. In the second before violence erupted, a new voice cut through the tension. "I think that's enough." Joseph Two Eagles sat his paint horse at the edge of the firelight, but he wasn't alone. Behind him, arranged in a semicircle, were at least 30 Apache warriors, all armed, all watching Thornton with deadly intent. "This isn't your fight, old man," Thornton said, but uncertainty had crept into his voice. "The Calders are under our protection," Joseph said simply. "They have proven themselves friends to our people. You have proven yourself an enemy." He raised his hand, and every warrior notched an arrow or raised a rifle. "Leave now. Do not return. This is your only warning." Thornton looked around at the Apache, at the ranch hands who'd grabbed their own weapons, at Clara, standing fierce and smoke-stained beside her husband. He was outnumbered and outmaneuvered. "This isn't over," he snarled. "Yes, it is." A new voice joined the confrontation. Sheriff Morton rode up with a federal marshal and several deputies. "Marcus Thornton, you're under arrest for arson, attempted murder, and conspiracy to commit fraud regarding water rights that don't actually belong to you." "What?" Thornton went pale. The marshal, a stern man with a face like carved granite, produced a document. "Seems someone did some digging into your land claims. Most of them are fraudulent, including your supposed ownership of the Crystal Creek watershed. You've been stealing water from federal land for years." All eyes turned to Clara, who smiled sweetly despite her scorched appearance. "I may have written to a friend of my father's in the land office. He was very interested in Mr. Thornton's creative interpretation of property lines." Thornton lunged toward her with a snarl, but never made it. Ethan's fist connected with his jaw, dropping him cold in the dirt. "That's for threatening my wife," Ethan said calmly, then looked at the marshal. "He attacked first. You all saw it." "Clearly self-defense," the marshal agreed, signaling his men to shackle the unconscious Thornton. "We'll be taking him and his hired guns back to Denver for trial. Something tells me he won't be troubling you folks again." It took the rest of the night to fully contain the fires. The hay barn was a total loss, but the house was saved with minimal damage. Cherokee Rose delivered a healthy colt just as the sun rose, as if the ranch was determined to show that life went on, despite Thornton's attempt at destruction. As Clara stood watching the new foal take his first steps, Ethan wrapped his arms around her from behind. "You saved them," he murmured against her hair. "The mares, the ranch, everything. That letter to the land office, when did you even write it? The day after Thornton first visited. I learned from my father's mistakes, always have legal backup when dealing with land disputes." "Brilliant woman." He turned her in his arms. "My brilliant, brave, possibly insane wife. You knew what you were getting when you proposed in a barn after 3 weeks." "Best decision I ever made." He kissed her soft and sweet. "Though Joseph's prediction might be right. This much excitement can't be good for someone in your condition." Clara pulled back, staring at him. "My what?" "You've been tired lately, dizzy in the mornings. You couldn't stomach breakfast yesterday. And there's something different about you, a glow, a change. I can feel it." His hand settled gently on her stomach. "Can't you—" Clara thought about it. Really thought about it, and realized he was right. She was late, had been tired, and there was indeed something different, a subtle sense of change within her body. "We're having a baby," she whispered. "I think we are." They stood there in the morning light, surrounded by the evidence of the night's battles, but also by the ongoing life of the ranch horses calling to each other ranch hands, already working to clear debris, Jacob's cheerful whistling from the main barn. It was messy and chaotic and perfect. "I love you." Clara said the words, feeling both inadequate and absolutely right. "And I love you," Ethan replied. I loved you before I met you, I think. I was just waiting for you to arrive. Since spring, she teased, recalling his words from that first night. Since forever, he corrected and kissed her again as the sun climbed higher, painting Ironwood Ranch in shades of gold and promise. The winter that followed brought both joy and sorrow to Ironwood Ranch in equal measure. Clara's pregnancy progressed with the changing seasons, her belly rounding as the snows deepened, and Ethan treated her like spun glass, despite her protests that she was perfectly capable of continuing her work with the horses. It was during a particularly fierce February blizzard that the first sign of new trouble appeared. Clara was in the kitchen teaching herself to make Sarah Calder's famous sourdough bread from a recipe card yellowed with age when she heard the sound of a woman crying, soft and desperate, coming from somewhere inside the house. She followed the sound upstairs, her hand instinctively moving to protect her growing child. The crying led her to a room she'd never entered before, Sarah's sewing room, kept exactly as she'd left it 5 years ago. Inside, a woman in a faded blue dress sat at the window, her face translucent as morning mist tears streaming down her ghostly cheeks. "Sarah," Clara whispered, though she knew this was impossible. She'd seen the grave, knew Ethan's mother was gone. The ghost turned and Clara gasped. It wasn't Sarah Calder. The features were different, younger, sadder. The spirit's mouth moved, forming words Clara couldn't hear, and then she pointed urgently toward the window before dissolving into nothing. Clara approached the window, carefully looking out into the swirling snow. There, barely visible through the blizzard, was a figure on horseback, slumped over clearly in distress. Without thinking, Clara grabbed her coat and rushed outside, calling for Ethan and Jacob as she went. They found the rider collapsed in the snow just inside the ranch gates, a young woman, perhaps 20, with dark hair and skin that marked her as mixed-blood Indian and Mexican, perhaps. She was burning with fever, delirious, clutching a bundle to her chest that she wouldn't release even unconscious. "Bring her inside," Clara ordered, her natural authority emerging. "Jacob, ride for Doc Harrison. Ethan, helped me get her to the guest room." As they carried the woman inside, her bundle shifted, revealing what she'd been protecting, a baby no more than 3 months old with the same dark hair and golden skin as its mother. "Dear God," Ethan breathed. "She rode through this storm with an infant." They worked through the night to save both mother and child. Doc Harrison arrived looking haggard from fighting through the snow, but he immediately set to work. The woman had pneumonia, severe exposure, and infection from what looked like a knife wound in her side that had been poorly tended. "She may not make it," Doc Harrison said grimly. Whatever she was running from, she considered it worse than risking death in this storm. For 3 days, Clara barely left the woman's bedside, spooning broth between her cracked lips, cooling her fever with snow-chilled cloths, singing the lullabies her own mother had sung. Ethan tended the baby with surprising gentleness, feeding it goat's milk from a bottle, walking the floors when it cried. On the 4th day, the woman's eyes finally opened, clear and aware. She looked at Clara with a mixture of fear and hope. "My baby will..." "Safe," Clara assured her. "Healthy and safe. You're at Ironwood Ranch. No one will hurt you here." The woman started crying, then great gulping sobs of relief. When she finally calmed, she told them her story. Her name was Maria Santos. She'd been married to one of Thornton's former hired guns, a cruel man named Jake Sullivan, who'd beaten her regularly and threatened to sell their baby to pay gambling debts. When she'd tried to leave, he'd stabbed her, but she'd managed to escape while he was drunk. She'd heard that Ironwood Ranch protected women and children, that the Calders were good people, so she'd ridden through the storm seeking sanctuary. "He'll come for me," Maria said, clutching Clara's hand. "Jake doesn't let go of what he considers his property." "Then he'll find more than he bargained for," Ethan said from the doorway, his voice hard as iron. "You're under our protection now, both of you." As if summoned by the conversation riders appeared 2 days later, 6 men led by a giant of a man with scarred hands and mean eyes that Clara knew must be Jake Sullivan. But Ethan was ready. He met them in the yard with Jacob and several hands, all armed, all steady. "I've come for my wife," Sullivan announced, his hand resting on his gun. "Your wife doesn't want to go with you," Ethan replied calmly. "She's made her choice." "She doesn't get a choice. She's mine by law. The law that lets you beat her, stab her, threaten to sell your own child. Clara appeared on the porch, rifle in hand, despite her visibly pregnant state. That's not law, Mr. Sullivan. That's evil wearing a legal mask. Sullivan's face darkened. You've got no right. I've got every right, Clara interrupted. Maria has asked for sanctuary and Ironwood Ranch has granted it. You can leave now peacefully or you can leave feet first. Your choice. Sullivan went for his gun but never cleared leather. Joseph Two Eagles' arrow took him in the shoulder, spinning him to the ground. The Apache warriors materialized from concealment, like ghosts becoming solid surrounding Sullivan's men before they could react. The woman chose her path, Joseph said simply. You chose yours. Be grateful we allow you to leave breathing. Sullivan's men dragged him away, cursing and threatening, but they didn't return. Maria slowly healed both in body and spirit, eventually taking over much of the household work to free Clara as her pregnancy advanced. She became part of Ironwood's growing family, her baby little Rosa bringing laughter to the house that had been silent too long. It was March when the second ghost appeared, this one to Ethan. Clara woke to find her husband's side of the bed empty. Not unusual given his restless nature, but something felt different. Wrong. She found him in the main barn, standing perfectly still in front of the empty stall where Samuel King had died, tears running down his face. Ethan. He turned to her and his eyes were strange, distant. He won't stop talking, he said. Father, he keeps telling me about the spring, about what's coming, but I can't quite hear him clearly. Clara approached carefully, taking his cold hands in hers. Your father's spirit is here. He comes when something's about to change. He came the night before Mother died, trying to warn me. Now he's here again, and I'm afraid, Clara. I'm afraid of what it means. She pulled him close, feeling him tremble against her. Whatever comes, we face it together. You're not alone anymore, Ethan. You'll never be alone again. They stood there in the barn, holding each other, when Lady Midnight suddenly began to panic in her stall. Not the panic of labor or illness, but pure terror. Then the other horses joined her, all of them screaming warnings. The earthquake hit seconds later. The ground rolled like ocean waves, throwing them both to their knees. Timber groaned and cracked above them. Clara felt Ethan throw himself over her, protecting her and their unborn child with his body as debris rained down. The world shook for what felt like hours, but was probably less than a minute. When it finally stopped, they were trapped. A beam had fallen across the stall entrance, too heavy for them to move, and the structure above looked ready to collapse completely at any moment. Are you hurt? Ethan asked, his hands moving over Clara's belly, checking for injury. No, we're fine. But Ethan, the horses... They could hear the animals' distress, some injured from the sound of it, but they also heard something else. Voices urgent and organized. Jacob's voice rose above the others, directing rescue efforts. It took 2 hours to free them, 2 hours during which Clara felt her first real labor pains, though she didn't tell Ethan. No point in adding to his worry when there was nothing to be done. By the time they emerged into dusty daylight, she was gripping his hand hard enough to leave bruises. The baby, he asked, immediately recognizing the signs. Coming, she gasped. Too early, 2 months too early. Doc Harrison was already at the ranch, having come to treat injured horses, and he immediately took charge. Maria proved invaluable, having assisted with births in her village in Mexico. But as the hours passed and Clara's labor intensified, it became clear something was wrong. The baby's in distress, Doc Harrison said quietly to Ethan, and Clara's losing too much blood. We need to make a choice. No, Clara interrupted, though she could barely speak through the pain. No choices. Save my baby. Clara, Ethan's voice broke. Promise me, Ethan. If it comes to it, save our child. I can't lose you. I won't survive it. Yes, you will. For our baby, for Jacob, for Ironwood. Promise me. Before Ethan could respond, Joseph Two Eagles entered the room. He'd arrived shortly after the earthquake with herbs and traditional medicines. No one dies today, he said firmly. The spirits are not ready for either soul. What followed was a blend of modern medicine and ancient wisdom. Doc Harrison handled the medical aspects, while Joseph burned herbs that eased Clara's pain and seemed to calm the baby's distress. Maria sang softly in Spanish, a prayer or lullaby, Clara couldn't tell which. As the sun set, painting the damaged ranch in shades of red and gold, Clara felt a shift. The pain changed, became productive rather than destructive. With a final push that took every ounce of strength she had left, their son entered the world. He was tiny, too small, but his cry was strong. Joseph wrapped him in the blanket he'd given them at their wedding, the one meant for their first child, and placed him on Clara's chest. "He's early but eager," Joseph said with a smile. "Like his parents, too impatient to wait for the proper time." "What should we name him?" Clara asked, looking up at Ethan, who was crying openly now, unashamed of his tears. "Thomas says," Ethan said. "Thomas Joseph Calder, for your father and for the man who helped save you both." Joseph looked deeply moved. "It's an honor I don't deserve. It's an honor you've more than earned," Clara insisted, then gasped as another pain hit. "Oh God, there's another one!" Doc Harrison confirmed, his eyes wide. "Twins! There's another baby!" 20 minutes later, Sarah Jane Calder joined her brother in the world, even tinier, but equally determined to be heard. The blanket Joseph had given them turned out to be large enough for both babies, as if he'd somehow known. "Did you?" Clara asked him weakly. Joseph's eyes twinkled. The spirits sometimes whisper of futures that might be. "I simply listen." The earthquake had damaged much of the ranch, but in the weeks that followed, the community came together to rebuild. Neighbors who'd once whispered about the cursed ranch now brought food supplies and willing hands. The Apache helped rebuild the barn with techniques that would make it stronger against future quakes. Even families from town people who'd initially looked askance at Clara for her unconventional arrival and quick marriage came to help and to coo over the twins. It was during this rebuilding that they made the discovery. Jacob was helping to clear debris from the collapsed section of the old barn when his shovel hit something metal. Further digging revealed a strong box, old but intact, buried beneath what had been the empty stall's floor. Inside were gold coins enough to rebuild everything twice over, and a letter in Sarah Calder's handwriting. "For the one who comes after," Ethan read aloud, "the one who will understand the true treasure of Ironwood isn't gold or land or even horses. It's family, both blood and chosen. Use this to protect what matters." "She knew," Clara said softly, adjusting little Sarah in her arms while Ethan held Thomas. "Your mother knew about the earthquake, about the twins, about all of it." "She always said the land speaks to those who listen," Ethan replied. "Maybe she heard more than she ever told us." As spring arrived in full glory, painting the valley in wildflowers and fresh grass, Ironwood Ranch stood stronger than ever. The rebuilt structures were better than the originals designed with Maria's practical input and Joseph's traditional knowledge. The horse breeding program had produced several exceptional foals, including Storm's daughter, who showed signs of being the fastest horse the ranch had ever produced. It was a morning in early May when the final ghost appeared. Clara was sitting on the porch, nursing the twins while watching the sunrise, when she saw them, two figures walking hand in hand through the pasture. Samuel King was one, but he looked different, peaceful now instead of anguished. Beside him walked a young woman in a blue dress, the same ghost Clara had seen that snowy day when Maria arrived. They stopped at the porch steps, and for the first time Clara could hear them speak. "Thank you," Samuel said, "for keeping my stall empty, for remembering me with kindness instead of shame." "Who is she?" Clara asked, nodding toward the woman. "My sister," Samuel replied. "She died years before I came here in childbirth. She's been waiting for me to let go of my guilt, to forgive myself, so we could move on together." The woman smiled at Clara, a radiant expression that transformed her sad face. "You've changed everything," she said. "Your love, your children, your courage. You've broken the cycle of sorrow that held us here. Ironwood is free now." "Will you stay?" Clara asked, surprising herself with the question. "No," Samuel said. "It's time for us to go, but others will stay. Sarah and Thomas Calder will always watch over their family. And this land, these horses, they'll remember us all in their own way." The ghosts faded with the morning mist, and Clara felt a weight lift from the ranch that she hadn't even realized was there. When Ethan joined her on the porch, taking Sarah while Clara continued with Thomas, she told him what she'd seen. "So the haunting is over?" he asked. The sad parts are, Clara said, but I think your parents will always be here in some way watching over their grandchildren. As if in response, a warm breeze swept across the porch, carrying the scent of Sarah's favorite roses from the garden that had miraculously survived the earthquake. In the pasture, the horses began their morning dance led by Stormbringer and his daughter, their hooves drumming against the earth in a rhythm that sounded almost like laughter. Summer arrived with abundant rain and perfect temperatures ideal for horses and growing babies alike. The twins thrived, Thomas showing his father's quiet intensity even as an infant, while Sarah had her mother's fierce spirit and quick smile. Maria's daughter Rosa had become their devoted guardian, a toddler herself, but determined to help with her babies, as she called them. It was during a particularly beautiful evening in July with the whole extended family gathered for dinner. Ethan, Clara, the twins, Jacob, Maria, Rosa, and even Joseph Two Eagles, that Clara realized the fullness of what they'd built. This wasn't just survival anymore, wasn't just making do. This was a life rich and complete, filled with love and purpose and hope. "What are you thinking?" Ethan asked, catching her contemplative mood. "I'm thinking about that day I arrived with $3.17, Clara said. "How desperate I was, how alone. And now look at us." "It was fate," Maria said firmly. "God's plan." "It was choice," Jacob countered. Clara chose to answer that advertisement. Ethan chose to hire her. "It was the land," Joseph added. "It called to both of them." "Maybe it was all of those things," Ethan said, raising his glass of whiskey and a toast. "Or maybe it was just love, pure and simple, to Clara, who saved us all." "To family," Clara corrected, raising her own glass of cider. "All of us together." They drank, and as they did, Clara could have sworn she heard other voices joining their celebration. Sarah and Thomas Calder, Samuel and his sister, all the spirits who had touched Ironwood Ranch over the years. But these weren't ghosts of sorrow anymore. These were echoes of joy. Blessings for the future promises that love transcends death and family extends beyond blood. That night after the twins were asleep and the house had settled into peaceful quiet, Clara and Ethan stood on their bedroom balcony looking out over their domain. The ranch stretched out before them in the moonlight, peaceful and prosperous, no longer haunted by tragedy, but blessed by triumph. "Do you ever regret it?" Ethan asked. "Taking that midnight job, you could have gone anywhere, done anything." "This is my anywhere," Clara said, turning in his arms to face him. "You're my everything. From the moment I saw you in that saloon, I knew I was home. Even with the ghosts and earthquakes and violent ex-husbands and early twins, especially with all of that. It's our story, Ethan, messy and dramatic and absolutely perfect." He kissed her, then deep and sweet, and Clara felt that same electric connection she'd felt from the beginning, stronger now for all they'd shared. When they pulled apart, Ethan's eyes held that intensity that still made her heart race. "I love you," Clara called her. "More than I did yesterday, less than I will tomorrow." "And I love you," Ethan called her, "forever and a day beyond that." A soft cry from the nursery interrupted them, Sarah always the more demanding twin. They went together to tend their children, moving in the easy synchronization of partners who knew each other completely. As Clara lifted her daughter and Ethan picked up Thomas, who'd woken in sympathy with his sister, she marveled at how natural this felt, how right. The midnight job that had seemed like desperation's last resort had become destiny's perfect design. Every ghost, every challenge, every moment of fear and triumph had led them here to this moment, this family, this love that defied logic but defined truth. Through the nursery window, the first hints of dawn were beginning to lighten the eastern sky. Soon the ranch would wake to another day of work and growth and possibility. The horses would need tending, the repairs from the earthquake still needed finishing, and the twins would demand constant attention. It would be exhausting and exhilarating in equal measure, just like every day at Ironwood Ranch. Clara wouldn't have it any other way. As she rocked Sarah back to sleep, she found herself humming the lullaby her mother used to sing, the one about home and heart and hope. Across the room, Ethan was murmuring to Thomas about the horses he'd ride someday, the legacy he'd inherit. Between them, love flowed like a river, strong and sure and eternal. The ghosts were quiet now, the dangers past, the future bright with promise. Ironwood Ranch had tested them with fire and earth, with spirits and storms, and they'd emerged not just intact, but stronger. Whatever came next, Clara knew they could face it together. She'd started with $3.17 running from grief toward uncertain sanctuary. She'd found so much more love that transcended time, a family forged in crisis, and sealed in joy a home that embraced both the living and the dead. The midnight job had been her salvation, but Ethan had been her destiny. As the sun rose fully painting the ranch in gold and possibility, Clara made a silent promise to Sarah Calder's spirit wherever she was. She would protect this legacy. Nurture this love, raise these children to understand that true wealth wasn't measured in gold or land, but in the connections that bind hearts across time and space. The midnight hours at Ironwood Ranch no longer held terrors. They held memories and promises, the quiet breathing of sleeping babies, the soft nickering of contented horses, the steady heartbeat of a man who'd waited for her since spring and would love her past winter through all the seasons of their intertwined lives. This was her story. Their story, Ironwood's story, written in courage and sealed with love, a testament to the power of choosing hope over fear, connection over isolation, love over loss. And it was only the beginning. The years that followed brought their own rhythm to Ironwood Ranch, marked not by ghosts or earthquakes, but by the steady growth of children and horses, the changing seasons, and the deepening roots of a love that had begun with such dramatic urgency. Thomas and Sarah grew like prairie grass after rain, strong and wild and beautiful, carrying their parents' best traits, along with a few challenging ones. It was on the twins' 5th birthday that the letter arrived, changing everything Clara thought she knew about her past. She was in the kitchen, frosting a cake, while Maria helped the children string paper decorations when Jacob brought in the mail. Among the usual correspondence was an official-looking envelope from a law firm in Boston, addressed to Clara Whitfield Calder. "That's odd," Clara murmured, wiping her hands on her apron. "I don't know anyone in Boston." The letter inside was formal, precise, and shocking. Her maternal grandfather, a man she'd never known existed, had died, leaving her his entire estate, a shipping fortune worth more than 100 Ironwood ranches. The only condition was that she had to travel to Boston to claim it in person within 60 days. "I don't understand," Clara said, sinking into a chair as Ethan read the letter over her shoulder. "Mother never mentioned having family in Boston. She said her parents died before I was born." "Maybe there was a falling out," Ethan suggested carefully. "Families sometimes bury their troubles along with their dead." But Clara could see the worry in his eyes. Boston was a world away from their life in the frontier, a place of society rules and old money expectations. And the timing felt wrong, somehow too convenient after years of silence. "You have to go," Jacob said, practical as always. That kind of money could secure the ranch for generations, set up the twins for life. "I'll go with you," Ethan said immediately, but Clara shook her head. "Someone needs to stay with the ranch, especially with the autumn gathering coming up. And the children can stay with Maria and me," Jacob interrupted. "This is important, Clara. You need to know where you come from, and Ethan needs to be with you when you find out." The decision to travel east felt momentous, like standing at the edge of a cliff. But 3 weeks later, Clara found herself on a train heading toward Boston. Ethan beside her. Both of them dressed in clothes that felt like costumes. His new suit uncomfortable after years of ranch wear, her traveling dress too fine for someone who'd grown used to work clothes. "You're nervous," Ethan observed as Illinois farmland flashed past the window. "Terrified," Clara admitted. "What if this changes everything? What if there are expectations, obligations? Then we face them together and make our choices together." He took her hand, his calluses rough against her skin. "Nothing changes what we've built, Clara. Nothing changes us." Boston overwhelmed them from the moment they arrived. The crowds, the buildings reaching toward the sky, the cacophony of carriages and streetcars and countless voices, it was as foreign as another country. The address from the law firm led them to a mansion on Beacon Hill that took Clara's breath away. 4 stories of red brick and white trim windows, like watching eyes adore, that looked like it had never admitted anyone who'd worked with their hands. The lawyer, Mr. Pemberton, was everything Clara had expected, elderly, precise, and slightly disapproving of Ethan's presence, until she made it clear her husband would be part of all conversations. Your grandfather was William Ashford, Pemberton explained, leading them into a study lined with more books than Clara had ever seen in one place. One of Boston's most successful shipping magnates. Your mother was his only child. Then why, Clara began, but Pemberton held up a hand. Perhaps this will explain. He handed her a leather journal worn with age. Your grandfather kept this. He wanted you to have it if you were ever found. Clara opened the journal with trembling hands, reading her grandfather's careful script. The story that emerged was one of love and loss, pride, and terrible mistakes. Her mother, Elizabeth Ashford, had fallen in love with a horse trainer, Clara's father, when she was 18. William had forbidden the match, threatening to disown her if she married beneath her station. Elizabeth had chosen love over money, disappearing west, with her husband cutting all ties to protect them both from her father's wrath. He searched for her, Pemberton said quietly. Hired detectives offered rewards. But your parents were careful, changed their names, stayed away from cities. It was only after both their deaths that we finally traced you to Missouri, and by then you'd already left for the frontier. Clara felt tears sliding down her cheeks as she read her grandfather's final entries, full of regret and longing for the daughter he'd driven away, the granddaughter he'd never met. His fortune, built on pride and ambition, meant nothing without family to share it with. There's more, Pemberton said, producing another document. Your grandfather owned several properties beyond this house. One might interest you particularly, a horse farm in Kentucky, 500 acres of prime bluegrass country. He bought it 15 years ago. After Mother left, Clara realized. He bought a horse farm after driving her away for loving a horse trainer. Irony was not lost on your grandfather. He hoped perhaps one day it might bring her back. They spent 3 days in Boston, Clara signing documents and making arrangements. The fortune was real staggering in its scope. But what affected her most were the photographs Pemberton provided her mother as a young woman, looking exactly like Clara did now, standing beside a stern-faced man whose eyes held the same sadness she'd seen in Ethan's before she'd arrived at Ironwood. We could live here, Ethan said one evening, standing in the mansion's ballroom. You could claim your place in society, give the twins advantages we never dreamed of. Clara looked at him. This man who'd offered to change his entire life for her, and loved him even more. The twins already have every advantage that matters. They have parents who love them, a home that nurtures them, and a legacy of courage and connection. Besides, she moved into his arms. Can you imagine Thomas and Sarah in a Boston drawing room? They'd have the place in ruins within minutes. Ethan laughed, the sound echoing off the ornate ceiling. Fair point. So what do we do with all this? We take the money, sell this museum, and go home. But Clara paused, thinking, what if we kept the Kentucky farm? Not to live there, but as a second operation. Jacob's been talking about expanding the breeding program. We could build something that connects both worlds, the wild spirit of Ironwood with the refined bloodlines of Kentucky. Building a bridge between your two heritages, Ethan said, understanding immediately. Your mother would have loved that. They returned to Ironwood to find controlled chaos. The twins had convinced Jacob to let them help with the autumn roundup, and both children were absolutely filthy and absolutely delighted. Sarah had somehow tamed a wild colt everyone else had given up on, while Thomas had organized the ranch hands with a precision that reminded everyone eerily of his father. Mama? Sarah flew into Clara's arms, leaving dusty handprints on the fine traveling dress. Uncle Jacob let me ride Storm's daughter. She's the fastest horse in the whole world, and I helped with the accounts. Thomas added, more reserved but equally excited. Uncle Jacob says I have a head for numbers like Grandma Clara. Clara felt her heart swell. Her children were growing into themselves, finding their own paths while staying rooted in the land that had given their parents sanctuary and purpose. That evening, after the children were asleep and the story of Boston had been shared, the family gathered on the porch, as they often did. Maria had made her special chocolate flavored with cinnamon and memory, and even Joseph Two Eagles had come to hear about the journey. So you're rich now, Jacob said, but his tone was teasing rather than envious. Going to buy us all out and turn Ironwood into some fancy Eastern establishment. Actually, Clara said, I was thinking we could use some of the money to build a school. Not just for our children, but for all the ranch children, the Apache children too, if they want. Education that honors both traditional knowledge and modern learning. Joseph smiled approvingly. The bridge builder. Your mother and your grandfather would both be proud. And the hospital in town needs expanding, Ethan added, already thinking ahead. Doc Harrison can't handle everything alone anymore. And we could improve the workers' quarters, Maria suggested quietly. Give the families real homes, not just bunkhouses. As they talked long into the night planning improvements that would benefit everyone while maintaining the essential character of Ironwood, Clara realized this was her grandfather's true gift, not just money, but the ability to make choices based on vision rather than desperation. The school was built that winter, a beautiful structure that managed to look both permanent and organic, as if it had grown from the land itself. They hired 2 teachers, Miss Catherine from Philadelphia, who'd come west for her health and stayed for the freedom, and Robert Crowfeather, one of Joseph's nephews who'd been educated in the East, but returned to teach both ways of knowing. Thomas and Sarah thrived in the structured learning environment, though they still preferred their practical education with the horses. Sarah showed a particular gift for languages, picking up Spanish from Maria and Apache from Joseph's visits, while Thomas demonstrated an understanding of mathematics and engineering that astounded his teachers. It was the following spring, just after the twins' 6th birthday, that Ethan made his announcement. I want to try something, he said over breakfast, his tone casual but his eyes intense. Remember Storm's daughter, how fast she is? The fastest, Sarah said loyally. The horse had become her special pet, following her around like an oversized dog. I want to race her, professionally. There's a circuit that runs through Colorado, New Mexico, even out to California. Good prize money, but more importantly, reputation. If we could prove Ironwood horses can compete with the best bloodlines anywhere, it would put us on the map, Clara finished understanding immediately. Buyers would come from everywhere. But it means traveling, Ethan continued. Sometimes for weeks. I wouldn't ask, except, we'll all go, Clara interrupted, at least for the summer races. It would be good for the children to see more of the world. The look of relief and joy on Ethan's face made the decision worth any inconvenience. This was his dream. She realized something he'd never dared voice when survival was the only goal. Now, with security assured, he could reach for more. The summer racing circuit became one of Clara's favorite memories. They traveled in a specially outfitted wagon that was part home, part stable, with the twins treating every journey as an adventure. Storm's daughter with Jacob as her jockey. Won race after race, her unique bloodline, that mix of Arabian speed, Morgan endurance, and something wild and indefinable, proving unbeatable. But it was at a race in Santa Fe that their past caught up with them in an unexpected way. Clara was watching the twins play with local children, teaching them a game Maria had shown them when she heard a familiar voice. Well, Clara Whitfield, or should I say Clara Ashford, or is it Calder now? She turned to find Marcus Thornton's son, William, standing before her. She'd heard Thornton himself had died in prison, but his son had inherited what was left of the estate, and apparently his father's grudges. Mr. Thornton, she said coolly, I heard you'd moved to California. Business brings me back occasionally, like watching the races, seeing what stock is worth buying. His eyes glittered with malice. That's a fine mare you're running. Shame if something happened to her. Before Clara could respond, Ethan appeared, seeming to materialize from nowhere as he always did when she needed him. But it wasn't Ethan that made William Thornton step back. It was Thomas and Sarah flanking their father like tiny guardians. You're bothering our mother, Thomas said, his 6-year-old voice carrying an authority that was almost comical, except for the steel behind it. And we don't like it. Sarah added, her hand moving to the toy tomahawk Joseph had given her, which she carried everywhere. William looked at the family arrayed against him, Ethan's quiet menace, Clara's steady strength, even the children's fierce protectiveness, and seemed to realize he was outnumbered in more ways than one. No harm meant, he said, backing away. Just saying hello to old neighbors. After he left, Ethan pulled Clara close. You all right? Fine, but he threatened Storm's daughter. Jacob's already moving her to a guarded stall. Some of the Apache riders from home are here for the races. They'll watch her. This was their life now, Clara realized. Not just the dramatic confrontations of their early days, but the ongoing vigilance required to protect what they'd built. Yet she wouldn't trade it for all the safety of Boston society. Storm's daughter won the Santa Fe race by 3 lengths, a victory that established Ironwood's reputation beyond question. Orders for horses began pouring in from ranches and racing stables across the West. They were selective about buyers, Ethan insisting that their horses go only to those who would treat them well. But even so, the ranch prospered beyond anything they'd imagined. It was autumn when they returned home, the aspens turning gold like coins scattered across the mountains. The ranch had thrived under Jacob and Maria's management, and there were new foals to admire, including one from Lady Midnight that looked like it might surpass even Storm's daughter for speed. But the biggest surprise waited in the main house. "We're getting married," Jacob announced at dinner. Maria beside him, both of them glowing with happiness. "If that's all right with everyone." "It's about time," Clara said, embracing them both. "I was beginning to think we'd have to lock you two in the barn until you figured it out." The wedding was held in the same grove where Clara and Ethan had married, but this time it was a grand affair. The entire territory seemed to attend ranchers, townspeople, Apache friends, even some of the eastern buyers who'd become regular clients. Clara played the piano while Maria walked down an aisle strewn with autumn leaves, Rosa as her flower girl, and the twins as ring bearers. "You did this?" Ethan whispered to Clara as they watched Jacob and Maria exchange vows. "You brought love back to Ironwood." "Love was always here," Clara replied. "It just needed someone to open the doors and windows, let it breathe again." The years rolled on, marked by the rhythms of ranch life, but also by larger changes. The railroad came closer, bringing easier access to markets, but also new challenges. The town grew sometimes in ways that worried Clara, with saloons multiplying and a rougher element moving in. But Ironwood remained a constant, a place of refuge and purpose. The twins grew into remarkable young people. Thomas at 10 showed all the signs of becoming a brilliant businessman and horseman, combined able to evaluate bloodlines with uncanny accuracy, while also managing the ranch's increasingly complex finances. Sarah, also 10, but seeming older in the way of daughters who watch everything, had become the finest rider in the territory, able to communicate with horses in a way that even Ethan found remarkable. It was just after their 10th birthday that Clara found out she was pregnant again. "I thought we were done," she told Ethan, half laughing, half crying. "The twins are practically grown. I'm 35 years old." "You're perfect," Ethan said, his joy unmistakable. "And this child will be perfect too, another blessing for Ironwood." The pregnancy was different this time, easier in some ways because Clara knew what to expect, harder in others because she wasn't 25 anymore. But the ranch rallied around her, Maria taking over the household management, the twins surprisingly helpful and excited about a sibling, even Joseph, arriving with special teas that eased her discomfort. "This child will be different," Joseph told her one evening, his ancient hands gentle on her belly. "Not better or worse than the twins, but different. A bridge to the future." "What do you mean?" "The world is changing, Clara. The old ways and new ways are colliding. This child will need to navigate. Both will help Ironwood evolve while staying true to its roots." Clara wanted to ask more, but Joseph's prophecies were always clearer in hindsight than prospect. The baby came during a spring thunderstorm, rain lashing the windows while Clara labored. This time, there was no emergency, no drama, just the steady ancient work of bringing life into the world. Ethan stayed beside her throughout, his presence as solid and comforting as the mountains visible through the window. When their second son was born, he was quiet, alert, studying the world with eyes that seemed to hold unusual wisdom. They named him William for Clara's grandfather, and Joseph for their friend, but from the beginning everyone called him Will. Will was indeed different from the twins, quieter, more observant, with a talent for making peace between opposing forces. When Thomas and Sarah quarreled, which happened more as they entered adolescence, Will could calm them with a word or gesture. When the ranch hands had disputes, Will somehow mediated without anyone quite realizing he was doing it. "He's got the sight," Joseph said when Will was 3, watching the boy play with a foal that should have been too skittish for such young hands. "He sees connections others miss." It was true. Will seemed to understand not just horses, but all animals, wild and domestic. Birds would land on his outstretched hands. Rabbits would emerge from hiding when he called, and even the ranch's bad-tempered bull turned docile in his presence. The years of Will's childhood were golden ones for Ironwood. The ranch had become an empire of sorts, with the Kentucky operation thriving under a manager they'd hired a network of partner ranches across the West, and a reputation that brought buyers from as far as Europe. Thomas had started accompanying Ethan on business trips, learning the art of negotiation and the science of breeding. Sarah had begun competing in races herself, scandalizing proper society and delighting everyone else. But it was Will who perhaps understood Ironwood's true value. "It's not about the horses, is it?" he asked Clara one evening when he was 7. They were sitting on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains purple and gold. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" "The ranch. It's not really about horses or money or even land. It's about home, about having a place where different kinds of people can belong together." Clara pulled him close, marveling at the wisdom in such a young soul. "Yes, Will, that's exactly what it's about." "That's why the ghosts stay peaceful now," Will continued matter-of-factly. "They're home, too." Clara didn't question how he knew about the ghosts. Will knew many things he shouldn't. It was part of his gift, part of what made him special. When the twins turned 16, Ethan and Clara faced a decision they'd been dreading. Both children had been offered opportunities to attend university in the East Thomas at Harvard, for business Sarah at a progressive women's college in Massachusetts. "They should go," Clara said, though her heart broke at the thought. "They need to see the wider world make their own choices." "Sarah won't want to leave the horses," Ethan pointed out. "And Thomas won't want to leave the ranch accounts," Clara added. But when they presented the opportunity to the twins, both surprised them. "We've talked about it," Thomas said, Sarah nodding beside him. "We want to go, but only for 2 years, then we come home." "The ranch needs us to learn," Sarah added. "Not just about horses and numbers, but about the world that's coming. The automobile, the telephone, all these changes, Ironwood needs to be ready." Clara looked at her children, so grown, so wise, so clearly their father's and her own legacy combined, and felt pride overcome sadness. "Then you'll go, and you'll come back stronger." The day the twins left for the East was one of the hardest Clara had experienced since her parents' deaths. But Will, now 9, took her hand as they watched the train disappear into the distance. "They'll be back," he said with complete certainty. "Ironwood is in their blood. They couldn't stay away if they tried." He was right, of course. Letters came weekly, sometimes daily, full of observations and experiences and homesickness. Thomas wrote about economic theories that could improve the ranch's efficiency, while Sarah wrote about meeting other women who rode and competed, who were fighting for the right to vote and own property in their own names. "The world is changing," Ethan said one evening, reading Sarah's latest letter about a suffragette rally she'd attended. "Good," Clara replied. "It needs to change, and our children will help shape that change." 2 years passed quickly, marked by Will's quiet growth, the ranch's continued prosperity, and the deepening of Clara and Ethan's love. If anything, the years had made them closer, each challenge faced together, strengthening the bond formed in those first dramatic weeks. When the twins returned, they were transformed. Thomas had the polish of Eastern education, overlaying his Western practicality, while Sarah had become a force of nature, still wild, still free, but now armed with knowledge and connections that would serve the ranch well. "We have ideas," Thomas announced at their welcome home dinner. "So many ideas," Sarah added, grinning. They talked late into the night about modernization and tradition, about preserving Ironwood's essential character while adapting to a new century. Clara listened with wonder to these adults her children had become, seeing in them the best of all their inheritances. Ethan's intensity and her determination, the ranch's wildness and Boston's refinement, the old ways Joseph had taught them, and the new ways they'd learned in the East. "You know what this reminds me of?" Ethan set his arm around Clara as they finally headed to bed, leaving the twins still planning with Jacob and Maria. "What? That first night you arrived, the way you walked into the broken Spur ready to take on anything. Our children have that same courage." "They have your courage," Clara corrected. "The courage to wait for what matters, to fight for what's right, to build something that lasts." "They have us both," Ethan said, kissing her temple. "And that's why they'll succeed." Standing there in their home, surrounded by the sounds of family and the distant nickering of horses, Clara knew he was right. They'd built something extraordinary at Ironwood Ranch. Not just a successful business, but a true home, a place where love transcended death and family extended beyond blood, where the past was honored and the future welcomed. The midnight job that had brought her here seemed like a lifetime ago, yet also like yesterday. She was no longer the desperate girl with $3.17, but that girl's courage still lived in her just as Ethan's patient waiting had transformed into active building, as the ranch's ghost had transformed from sorrow to blessing. This was their legacy, not just the land or the horses or the money, but the proof that love could transform anything, that home could be created from hope and determination, that families could be forged from chance and choice combined. As they climbed the stairs to their bedroom, Clara could hear Will singing to the horses in the barn, his young voice carrying on the night wind. The twins were still talking in the kitchen, their voices bright with possibility. Maria and Jacob were laughing about something in their own home nearby. Even the ghosts seemed content, their presence a benediction rather than a haunting. Ironwood Ranch had become exactly what Sarah Calder had prophesied, a place where someone would come who would understand, who would bring love back to its halls and pastures. Clara had been that someone, but she'd also found her own salvation here, her own destiny in the form of a dark-eyed rancher who'd been waiting for her since spring. The story was far from over. There would be more challenges, more changes, more chances to prove that love and courage could overcome any obstacle. But tonight, surrounded by family and home and the endless possibility of tomorrow, Clara knew that whatever came next, they would face it as they always had, together with love, with hope, and with the unshakable certainty that some things are simply meant to be. The morning of Will's 13th birthday dawned with an unseasonable frost that turned the ranch into a crystal palace, every blade of grass glittering like diamond dust in the early sun. Clara stood at the kitchen window, watching her youngest son in the barn with the new foals, his gentle hands and quiet voice working their usual magic. He'd grown tall in the past year, nearly reaching Thomas's shoulder, but retained that otherworldly quality that made even hardened ranch hands speak of him in hushed, respectful tones. "He's out there again," Ethan said, coming up behind her, his arms encircling her waist. At 52, he'd gone silver at the temples, but his strength remained undiminished, his presence still capable of making her heart race like that first night in the saloon. "He says they're telling him something important," Claire replied, leaning back against her husband's solid warmth. "The horses. About change coming." Before Ethan could respond, the sound of automobiles, multiple ones, broke the morning peace. They exchanged glances. Few visitors arrived by car, the roads to Ironwood still being better suited to horses than machines. Thomas emerged from the ranch office, papers in hand, his face grave. At 23, he'd grown into a formidable man, combining his father's intensity with a businessman's acumen that had tripled Ironwood's holdings in the past 5 years. "We have a problem," he said, without preamble. "Those are federal agents. They're here about the water rights." Clara felt Ethan tense behind her. They'd been fighting this battle for 2 years now, the government's attempt to claim control over Crystal Creek, the water source that had caused so much conflict with Thornton years ago and remained vital to the ranch's survival. The lead agent was a thin man named Harrison, whose pale eyes reminded Clara unpleasantly of Marcus Thornton's. He presented his papers with bureaucratic efficiency, explaining that the government needed to redirect the creek for a new settlement being built 20 miles south. "That settlement wouldn't happen to be funded by William Thornton, would it?" Sarah asked. Riding up on Storm's daughter's latest offspring, a magnificent stallion she'd named Thunder's Promise. At 23, she cut an impressive figure, dressed in men's riding clothes, her hair bound back, her bearing regal, despite the dust of a morning ride. Harrison's slight flush confirmed their suspicions. William Thornton had learned from his father's mistakes. Instead of direct confrontation, he now used law and politics as weapons. "The paperwork is in order," Harrison said stiffly. "You have 30 days to contest the claim in federal court. Otherwise, the redirect begins." After the agents left, the family gathered in the main room, Ethan and Clara, the twins, Jacob and Maria with their own children, 3 boys who worshipped their cousin Will and Joseph, 2 eagles who'd arrived as if summoned by the crisis, though no one had sent word. "We fight," Thomas said immediately. "I have lawyer contacts from Harvard. Fighting in their courts with their rules, Sarah interrupted. That's what they expect. What they want. Then what do you suggest? Thomas shot back, the old sibling tension flaring. Wait, Will said quietly, and everyone turned to him. He stood by the window watching something none of them could see. The answer isn't in fighting, it's in remembering. Remembering what? Clara asked gently. Will turned to Joseph, who nodded as if they'd been having a silent conversation. Tell them about the treaty, Will said. Joseph's weathered face creased in what might have been a smile. The Calder's grandfather, when he won this land in that poker game, he didn't just win it from a thief. He won it from someone who'd stolen it from my people. But unlike others, he sought to make it right. There was a treaty signed and witnessed granting the Calder's stewardship of this land in partnership with the Apache Nation. But that was never filed with the federal government, Ethan pointed out. No, Joseph agreed. But it was filed with the Apache Nation, and recent law recognizes tribal treaties as superseding later federal claims. Thomas's eyes lit with understanding. If we can prove the ranch operates under a tribal treaty, the government can't touch the water rights. Sarah finished grinning fiercely. The next weeks were a whirlwind of legal maneuvering, historical research, and delicate negotiation. Clara found herself in the strange position of traveling to Washington, D.C., with Joseph and Will presenting their case to a Senate committee that seemed bemused by the entire situation. It was Will who ultimately swayed them, speaking with quiet eloquence about the ranch as a bridge between worlds, a place where different cultures met and mingled and thrived together. He told them about Maria's family finding sanctuary there, about the school that taught both traditional and modern knowledge, about the horses that carried bloodlines from 3 continents but ran free on Apache land. Ironwood Ranch isn't just a business, he concluded, his young voice carrying surprising authority. It's proof that America's promise works, that different peoples can come together, respect each other's claims, and build something greater than any could create alone. The senator leading the committee, a crusty old veteran of the Indian Wars, studied Will for a long moment. You're saying this ranch represents the future. I'm saying it represents hope. Will replied simply. They won. The treaty was recognized, the water rights confirmed, and William Thornton's settlement plan collapsed. But more than that, the case set a precedent that would protect similar arrangements across the West, earning the Calders unexpected allies among both tribal nations and progressive politicians. You did that? Clara told Will on the train home, pride warming her voice. We all did it, he corrected, but his eyes, so like his father's, yet holding their own unique light, sparkled with satisfaction. They returned to find the ranch in celebration mode, but also to unexpected news. Sarah had fallen in love. The object of her affections was James McKenna, an Irish immigrant who'd come to work with the horses and proved to have an almost supernatural gift with them. He was nothing like what Clara might have expected for her wild daughter. Quiet, where Sarah was fierce, thoughtful, where she was impulsive, steady, where she was mercurial. I know what you're thinking, Sarah told her mother, finding Clara alone in the garden one evening, that it's too much like you and Papa, the wealthy woman and the horseman. I'm thinking, Clara said carefully, that love rarely asks permission or follows expected patterns. Does he make you happy? He makes me, quiet inside, Sarah said, struggling for words. Like all the restlessness finally has somewhere to rest. Clara pulled her daughter close, remembering that feeling, that sense of coming home to a person rather than a place. Then that's all that matters. The wedding was held that autumn, the ranch decorated with aspen boughs and late roses. Sarah wore Clara's wedding dress, altered again, but carrying the history of love across generations. James looked thunderstruck as his bride approached, as if he couldn't quite believe his fortune. You did this too, Ethan murmured to Clara as they watched their daughter dance with her new husband. Created a place where such love could bloom. Love was always here, Clara replied, echoing words she'd said at Jacob and Maria's wedding. We just had to tend it like a garden. The years that followed brought rapid change. The automobile became common enough that they had to build proper roads to the ranch. The telephone arrived, connecting them instantly to buyers and suppliers worldwide. Thomas married a senator's daughter he'd met in Washington, a sharp-minded woman named Catherine, who understood both politics and horses. They built their own house on Ironwood land, close enough to be family, far enough to be independent. Will grew into a young man of unusual gifts, spending half his time at the ranch and half studying with various teachers, scientists interested in his ability to communicate with animals, anthropologists fascinated by his intuitive understanding of different cultures, even mystics who recognized in him abilities they couldn't quite name. "He's going to change the world," Joseph said one day, watching Will mediate a dispute between Apache water rights activists and local ranchers, finding a solution that satisfied everyone. "He already is," Clara replied. It was just after Will's 18th birthday that the letter arrived that would change everything once again. This one wasn't from lawyers or government agents, but from a film studio in California. They wanted to make a movie at Ironwood Ranch, a Western, that would capture the authentic spirit of the frontier. "Absolutely not," was Ethan's first response. "Turning our home into some circus." "It could be interesting," Thomas argued. "The money they're offering would fund the new breeding program for a decade." "It's not about money," Sarah interjected. Bouncing her infant son on her knee, she and James had been blessed with children quickly. Two boys who seemed to have inherited both their mother's fire and their father's steadiness. "It's about story. Our story." "What do you mean?" Clara asked. Sarah and Will exchanged glances, that wordless communication that had always existed between the siblings despite their age gap. "Tell them," Sarah urged. Will stood moving to the window as he often did when preparing to say something important. "The director who wants to come here, Robert Sterling, he's not interested in making just any Western. He's heard about Ironwood, about our real story. He wants to make a film about a woman who came west with nothing and built an empire of love and courage." Clara felt her cheeks flush. "That's ridiculous. Our story isn't what?" Will turned to face her, his eyes holding that penetrating quality that seemed to see through time itself. "Isn't remarkable. A woman with $3.17 becomes one of the most successful ranchers in the West, a love that was waiting since spring finally finds its match. Ghosts that transform from sorrow to blessing Apache and settlers working together when the rest of the country preaches separation. That's not a story worth telling, what is?" The debate continued for days, with Jacob and Maria weighing in the grandchildren, adding their opinions, even Joseph offering his perspective. Finally, it was Ethan who surprised everyone. "We should do it," he said one evening, causing Clara to stare at him in shock. "But only if we control the story. Only if they tell it true." Robert Sterling arrived 2 weeks later, a surprisingly young man with earnest eyes and an obvious passion for his craft. He brought a small crew to discuss the project, including his lead actress, a rising star named Margaret Sinclair, who bore an uncanny resemblance to young Clara. "I've researched your history extensively," Sterling said over dinner, his notebook filled with careful notes. "The midnight job advertisement, the first night with the Rustlers, the ghosts, Thornton's threats, the earthquake, the twins' birth. It's all incredible, but what moves me most is the love story, how two people recognized each other as if they'd been waiting forever." Clara felt Ethan's hand find hers under the table, their fingers interlacing with the ease of decades. "If we agree to this," Clara said slowly, "we have conditions. The Apache must be portrayed with respect and accuracy. Joseph's nephew, Robert Crow Feather, would serve as consultant. The working people must be shown as complex individuals, not stereotypes. And the women, Sarah, Maria, myself, we're not props for the men's stories. We have our own." Sterling's eyes lit up. "That's exactly what I want. The real story, not the myth." The filming took 3 months, during which Ironwood became a strange hybrid of working ranch and movie set. The actors shadowed the real cowboys, learning to ride and rope and respect the animals. Margaret Sinclair spent hours with Clara, absorbing not just her mannerisms, but her spirit. "How did you have such courage?" Margaret asked one day as they watched the sunrise from the porch. "Coming here alone, facing all of that." Clara thought about it, remembering the desperate girl she'd been. "I didn't have courage. I had desperation. But desperation can look like courage from the outside, and sometimes, if you pretend long enough, it becomes real." The most surreal moment came when they filmed the recreation of Clara and Ethan's first meeting. Watching actors portray that pivotal moment in the broken Spur saloon, Clara felt time collapse. She was both the desperate girl with $3 and the successful matriarch, both the seeker and the found. "It's strange," Ethan murmured, standing beside her as they watched, "seeing our beginning when we know how it continues." "Do we know?" Clara asked. "Or are we still in the middle of the story?" He pulled her close, kissing her temple with the same tenderness he'd shown for 30 years. "We're always in the middle of the story. That's what makes it worth living." The film, when it premiered, was a sensation. Midnight at Ironwood became one of the highest-grossing films of its time, bringing fame to the ranch that surpassed even its reputation for horses. Letters poured in from around the world, women inspired by Clara's courage couples, who saw their own love reflected in the story, even historians interested in the unique cultural dynamics the film portrayed. But perhaps the most unexpected result came 6 months after the premiere. Clara was in the kitchen preparing for another family dinner, a weekly tradition now that included so many more faces when Maria brought in the mail. Among the usual correspondence was a package from France, addressed in shaky handwriting. Inside was a photograph aged in yellow, showing a young couple standing before a small farmhouse. The woman looked exactly like Clara, or rather Clara looked exactly like her. The accompanying letter, written in French but translated by Thomas's wife Catherine, was from Clara's great-aunt, her grandmother's sister. "I saw the film in Paris," the letter read. "I recognized you immediately. You have the Ashford face, but more than that, you have the Ashford spirit. Your grandmother would be so proud. She too defied convention for love, though her story ended differently. Enclosed is all I have of her, but I thought you should have it proof that courage runs in your blood." The photograph's back bore an inscription, "Elizabeth Ashford, before she became Elizabeth Whitfield, with her beloved Thomas. May their daughter know love is true." Clara stared at the photograph, seeing her mother, young and hopeful, standing beside the man Clara had known only as a broken father, trying to hold on to a farm that was slipping away. "They were happy once," she said to Ethan, who'd come to see what had captured her attention. "And their daughter found happiness again," he replied, "completing the circle they began." Will entered then, now 20, and preparing to leave for an extended journey he'd been invited to study with various indigenous peoples around the world, learning their methods of communication with nature. "Before you go," Clara said impulsively, "I want you to have this." She handed him the photograph. "Your heritage, all of it." Will studied the image with that penetrating gaze of his. "They're here, you know. All of them. Grandparents. Great-grandparents. Even the ghosts who've moved on. They gather sometimes, especially on evenings like this, when the whole family comes together. They're proud of what you've built." "What we've built?" Clara corrected. "No," Will said gently. "What you started. Papa may have been waiting since spring, but you were the one who had the courage to answer an advertisement for a midnight job. You were the one who chose to stay despite the danger. You were the one who opened the doors to love." That evening, as the family gathered, Thomas and Catherine with their 3 children, Sarah and James, with their 4, Jacob and Maria, with their 5, Will, preparing for his journey, and even Joseph, ancient now but still vital. Clara looked around the table and marveled at what had grown from such desperate beginnings. "A toast," Ethan proposed, raising his glass, "to the midnight job that started it all." "To $3.17, Thomas added with a grin. "To courage that looks like desperation," Sarah continued. "To love that waits," Jacob offered. "To families both blood and chosen," Maria said. "To bridges between worlds," Joseph contributed. "To stories that never really end," Will concluded. Clara raised her own glass, tears blurring her vision. "To all of you, to all of this, to home." They drank, and as they did, Clara could have sworn she heard other voices joining the toast. Her parents, Ethan's parents, even Samuel King and his sister, all the spirits who had touched Ironwood Ranch over the years. The setting sun painted the room gold, and for a moment time seemed to hold its breath, preserving this instant of perfect completion. Later that night, after the grandchildren were asleep in various corners of the house, after the adult children had retired to their own homes, Clara and Ethan stood on their bedroom balcony, looking out over the ranch that sprawled beneath the stars. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't answered that advertisement? Ethan asked. Never, Clara replied immediately. Because that would mean wondering about a world without you, without our children, without all of this. And I can't imagine that world. Even with all the pain, the dangers we faced, Clara turned in his arms, looking up at the man who'd been her anchor and her adventure for 3 decades. His face showed the years lines carved by sun and wind and time, but his eyes still held that storm sky intensity that had captured her from the first moment. Especially with the pain. It's all part of the tapestry. Remove one thread, even the dark ones, and the whole picture changes. A coyote howled in the distance, answered by another, then another, their wild chorus echoing across the valley. Once that sound had frightened Clara. Now it was simply part of home's symphony. I love you, Ethan said, the words carrying the weight of 30 years but still fresh as the first time. More than on our wedding day, more than when our children were born, more than I thought possible. And I love you, Clara replied, my midnight cowboy, my patient waiter, my forever love. They kissed then, soft and sweet, a promise renewed beneath stars that had witnessed their entire journey. Somewhere in the house, a grandchild laughed in their sleep. From the barn came the soft nickering of horses, descendants of those Clara had saved that first dramatic night. The ranch breathed around them alive and vital proof that love could build empires not of gold, but of connection. The midnight job had brought her everything love family purpose home, from $3.17 to this moment of absolute abundance measured not in money, but in the faces around that dinner table, the stories that connected past to future, the love that had transformed 2 broken people into the foundation of something eternal. As they prepared for bed, Clara paused at the window, looking out one more time. Will was in the barn saying goodbye to the horses before his journey. Sarah and James's house glowed with warm light, probably up with a fussing baby. Thomas's home was dark, but she knew he'd be up before dawn reviewing contracts and planning expansions. The ranch sprawled around them all, protecting and nurturing a testament to what could be built when love was the foundation. Thank you, she whispered, not sure if she was talking to God Fate or the spirit of Sarah Calder who'd somehow orchestrated all of this. What was that? Ethan asked from the bed. Just saying thank you, for all of it. Come to bed, my love. Tomorrow Will leaves and Sarah wants to discuss buying that property in Oregon, and Thomas has meetings with investors from Japan. Clara smiled, moving toward the bed and the man who'd made all of this possible. In other words, another day at Ironwood Ranch. Another day of our story, Ethan agreed, pulling her close. As sleep took her, Clara thought she heard her mother's voice carried on the wind that sighed through the ranch. You did it, my darling girl. You found your way home. And she had. Not to a place, but to a person. Not to safety, but to adventure. Not to an ending, but to a story that would continue through children and grandchildren, through challenges and triumphs, through all the midnights yet to come. The girl with $3.17 had become a woman of infinite wealth, measured in the only currency that truly mattered, love, family, and the courage to answer when opportunity knocked, even when it came disguised as desperation at midnight on a frontier ranch. This was her story, their story, Ironwood's story, and it was far from over.